Hello, good morning. In the last class, the last part, we had started talking about India's relations with the United States. And we had made a framework of that relationship. And that simply means that we should have an idea of how that relationship is referred to. All right, so we said, what is the nomenclature used for describing India-US relations? Anyone? Just to jog your memory back to what we have done. Yes, we call it a comprehensive and global strategic partnership, which means what? Which means what? If somebody says, okay, tell me something about India-US relations. So you start and say that it's a comprehensive global strategic partnership. Then somebody says, what does it mean? So what would you say? What would you say? Next, आगे क्या किया था हमने? The answer is there itself. Yes, the second thing you said that this is a relationship which is important because it is based on convergence of values and interests. What values? Somebody asks you, what values are you talking about? Yes, so you can say that it is argued, for example, that it is a relationship between world's largest and world's oldest democracy. Meaning there may be some natural affinity between the two sides. ऐसा बहुत सारे लोग कह सकते हैं. Okay, so then moving beyond this simple idea of shared value, largest democracy, oldest democracy. What is actually the substance of this relationship? How do you tell us about the substance of the relationship? क्या है substance इस relationship का? There is something which is called optics. All right, दिखाने की चीज. हाथी के दिखाने के दांत और खाने के दांत अलग अलग होते हैं. So when we say value, what we are saying is ये दिखाने के दांत हैं. मतलब this is how you look at this relationship. But खाने के दांत क्या है? We say interests. All right, and then what does it mean? What is it that we learned in the last class? Okay, diplomatic and political engagements have flourished, have strengthened. Today, India and United States, according to many sources, have more than 50 dialogue mechanisms in diverse areas, not limited to any one particular area. Any example? Then you give an example. Any example? Right. So you have either at the bilateral level, apart from multiple working groups, dialogues like 2+2 dialogue, which is a strategic dialogue, which has been constituted by these sides in 2018, okay? Or at the regional and global level, dialogues like Quad, or even I2U2, all right? Or even their interactions at G20, and sometimes their interactions even otherwise. For example, when Japan, America, India, their leaders met over the past few years, we said JAI, all right? JAI, trilateral dialogue. So you have many examples of dialogue or interactions at UNSC. India as a non-permanent member, US as a permanent member. So that is one example. What is the other area that we talked about? Economic engagements have also grown. All right, which means what? That US has emerged as India's largest trading partner. That is generally the trend. All right. So in some years, maybe China is ahead of US, but generally US as a single country in recent times has been India's top trading partner. But more importantly, US is India's largest export destination. That is our largest market in terms of exports. All right. And then investments on both sides are also increasing. For example, people would say US investments in India stand at around 52 billion US dollars. And India's investments in the US are also increasing. So some people would say that around 17 billion US dollars of India's investments across 31 provinces or states of United States. So you understand that yes, economy is a pillar. What is the other pillar? Defense cooperation. We say that defense cooperation is a major driver of India-US relations in the current times. What does it mean? It means that there is a fairly diversified defense cooperation. Either it is seen in terms of major process, which is designating India as a major defense partner by the United States. Or it is seen in terms of increasing defense acquisition. We are buying defense equipments from the United States. Yesterday somebody in the chat box has said that but the foreign minister has said that US has not provided India weapons for decade. First of all, that was a misreading. हाँ, West US भी उसमें आता है ना? All right. So that I assume was a misreading. What foreign minister is simply saying is a historic pattern, right? For decades, most part of our existence and relations, West has not been our major defense partner, major supplier. But what we said was, yesterday if you notice, in the last 10 years, we started importing from the United States and the value of portfolio has increased to 20 billion US dollars. All right? Or our exercises. So some sources would say India exercises more with US than with any other country. All right? Or when we say defense indigenization, in each of our major defense relations, that is an emphasis. So we say that India and US have started something called the DTTI, which is Defense Technology Trade Initiative. All right? So defense is a driver of these relations. And thereby we can also say that relations have expanded to other areas like energy, technology. All right? And we say that, but largely what is driving this relationship, what forms the bedrock of this relationship is the geostrategic convergence which has emerged between India and US, which can mean one, either they share common values and interest in a large area like the Indo-Pacific, if not anywhere else, or their major concerns, for example, with a country like China, are similar, not same, similar. For example, what has happened most recently, अगर आप Indian Express पढ़ रहे हैं, तो you must have seen that US has released its national security strategy. All right? US national security strategy has been released. This is the latest thing. So in that, US identifies China as a major strategic competitor and India as a major partner. All right? So that is basically how we can say that geostrategic convergence, very wide convergence on a very large geography and issues therein, economic or strategic issues or other issues. There is a convergence between India and United States. And we also see that whenever there is such a large relationship, there would be differences. For example, somebody said that US is providing F-16 to Pakistan. That's nothing new. All right? US has revived that help. But we are also telling the US that even if you want us not to have relations with Russia, we are not going to let go of that relationship. मतलब हम US को बोल रहे हैं कि भाई हमारे relation रशिया के साथ हैं और रहेंगे. So US is also telling us कि हमारे relation पाकिस्तान के साथ हैं और रहेंगे. So everybody would do their own bit because everybody has their own interest. इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि relations are single issue relations. Relations are multiple issue relations. All right? And by and large, we look at the larger direction of relations. So we said that two major things have cemented India-US relations, or largely talk about the positive direction of India-US relations. One is how over the years there has been a bipartisan acceptance on both sides for these relations. So no matter whether it is a Democratic president or a Republican president, overall relations with India would remain significant in US, for US. No matter whether it is a Bharatiya Janata Party government or a Congress government or any other government in India, relations with US would remain significant, meaning it is not affected generally by political changes. That's the simple meaning. And second thing is, people act as a bridge in this relationship. The large Indian diaspora as part of American population, 4 million people of Indian origin living and working in United States. So that also is an important aspect of our relationship. So we will start with looking at some of the maps in the context of the relations that we have so far talked about. Which maps would we be saying? We would be saying a map of France. Yesterday we had talked about this relationship, and a map of UK. All right, yesterday we had talked about this relationship also. And I hope that you noticed that now newspapers are generally talking about India-UK trade agreement. All right, you would start noticing that, right? Because Diwali is the deadline, right? So before that, we would get some clarity on as to what is happening. But we are aware that this trade agreement is being negotiated. So this is France, an important strategic partner of India, country with which India signed its first strategic partnership agreement. And we said that it is a truly strategic partnership in terms of more issues of commonality rather than differences. Differences के बारे में बहुत ज़्यादा बात होती नहीं है इस relationship में. So we saw in terms of either dialogue, visits, or in terms of defense cooperation, technology cooperation, this relationship is flourishing, and we said commonality of values and commonality of interest is the driver of this relationship. So France, first of all, you will notice its location in continental Europe. It's a Western European country. It shares borders with, this is Spain, all right, Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, Iberian Peninsula. This is Pyrenees. Pyrenees is a geographical feature, all right, the highland area on the border of France and Spain. All right, UPSC only asks awareness-based questions. So Pyrenees are located in the region known as Pyrenees. So they are located between France and Spain. This is Andorra, a small principality in Europe. So Andorra is located between France and Spain. All right, so that is one border. Another border is this, Italy. All right, so here notice France is a Mediterranean coast country, and also notice islands like Corsica in the Mediterranean. World history में भी हम Corsica के बारे में reference पाते हैं. So Corsica is a French island. All right. Then here is Monaco. All right. Monaco is on the Mediterranean coast, right? And Monaco is a small country in Europe. This is Italy. All right. And with Italy, what geographical feature France shares is the Alps. All right. Italian Alps, French Alps, and this is Mont Blanc, the highest range in, highest peak in Alps. This is Switzerland, the next border, right? And see, we had talked about a doubly landlocked country in Central Asia, that is Uzbekistan. Second doubly landlocked country is Liechtenstein, between Switzerland and Austria. These two are landlocked countries, and thereby a country surrounded by them is a doubly landlocked country. Here is the location of Liechtenstein. Now move forward. This is the border with Germany. All right, Germany. So this is the Rhine River. All right, Rhine River. So Rhine River originates in the Alps, and what you see is that it forms a border between Germany and France. All right, and then ultimately it flows through Netherlands and flows into the Atlantic Sea or North Sea. Right. So this is the next border, which is with Germany, and then here it is Luxembourg. So another border of France is with Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a landlocked country between Germany and Belgium, apart from France. This is the Belgian border of France, so it shares a border with Belgium also. And this is, of course, English Channel, and across the English Channel you have the United Kingdom. Now notice the Atlantic coast of France. So Bay of Biscay is a major feature. So Bay of Biscay, north of Spain and surrounded by France, right? And then capital of France is Paris, which is on the bank of the river Seine. All right, so this is Paris on the banks of Seine, right? And then some cities of France, as I had said, France has faced multiple what are called lone wolf attacks. So some cities of France have been in news, for example, Marseille or Toulon or Nice, right? These cities have been in news. And Strasbourg, a city on the French-German border, is important in terms of location of multiple European Union institutions, right? So some bit of awareness. Now let's talk about United Kingdom. This is United Kingdom. United Kingdom of what? United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. All right, so what is Great Britain? This large island is generally known as Great Britain because there is a region in France. Historically, France and UK had relations. All right, sometimes French coveted the throne of UK, Britain. Sometimes the British wanted the throne of France, right? Relations of intermarriages, relations of ethnicity. So there is a region called Brittany in France. To differentiate it from Brittany, this is called Great Britain or larger Britain. So if you see United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So you have in this island multiple regions. These are the regions of UK. You have England, right? The cricket team that you see. England. London, the capital of UK, is located in England. All right. And then cities like Birmingham, Manchester, these are in England. Then Wales. You must have heard of term Prince of Wales. All right. So cities like Cardiff they are in Plymouth, they are in Wales, all right, and then you start moving up. So these are highlands, and this is the region of Scotland. Scotland has conducted multiple referenda to secede from the UK. है ना, हमारे यहाँ कोई बात कर दे तो हम डर जाते हैं. But Scotland had held multiple referendums whether it wants to remain a part of UK or not. So far, the vote of the referendum has been to remain in the UK. But this is Scotland, right? The headquarter of this is two major cities, Glasgow and Edinburgh, right? Educational centers or political centers of Scotland, Scottish Highlands. And then this is the island of Ireland, Northern Ireland. All right, this is Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of UK, right? So Northern Ireland with its headquarters in Belfast. And then south of this island is Republic of Ireland, an independent country which is part of the European Union. That's why we had said that the only land border between European Union and UK lies in Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And in that context, we had said in Brexit there were multiple issues. One particular term which was used was backstop solution. Backstop solution referred to the solution reached by European Union and UK on their border in Northern Ireland, right? And then notice some of the things. For example, the Celtic Sea in Atlantic, all right? The Celtic Sea in Atlantic, and then the Irish Sea. Of course, ये तो बहुत ज़्यादा ध्यान देने की ज़रूरत नहीं है आपको. And this is majorly what we know as UK. This is Isle of Man, all right? This is referred to as an external territory of the UK, all right? Directly under the Crown, Isle of Man. So Isle of Man is located, you will remember, in the Irish Sea. So simple awareness about the locations that we have talked about is, as we have seen in questions, important for the examination. Examination हमेशा awareness based question पूछता है rather than any complicated questions, right? So this is the map of United States, right? United States. So you simply, इस case में बहुत ज़्यादा difficulty है नहीं in terms of neighbors, right? On the south is Mexico, all right? This is the Mexico border. On the north is Canada, right? And then this is Alaska, not in terms of location, but map में केवल दिखाने के लिए Alaska को separately यहाँ दिखा दिया. But Alaska is towards north. Alaska is connected by Canada, connected with Canada. So Alaska can be said to be an exclave of the United States. Exclave, meaning it is not linked directly with the mainland. All right, territorially not linked with the mainland of US, right? Alaska. So this is Alaska, and then there is another far-flung territory, Hawaii. All right, location exactly यहाँ पे नहीं है. Location हमने देखा था when we talked about Pacific Islands. All right, so this is Hawaii, right? And now two coasts of the United States are generally talked about. This is the Atlantic coast, or the which coast? Which direction is this in US? North, east. All right, east. Yeah, west, east. Okay, so east coast of US, Atlantic coast, and here you will find what? This is where the first colonizers arrived. All right, so here you will find some areas which are called, for example, New England, areas like New England, where first colonial settlements were built. But here we find major features like the capital, which is Washington DC. All right, capital Washington DC. And then you have major cities like New York. This is New York, right, on the Atlantic coast, right? And this is here you will see Florida. All right, so Florida, Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean. And here on the border there are certain other major features, for example, lakes, Great Lakes as they are called, the Great Lakes region. So Lake Superior. Lake Superior is world's largest freshwater lake in terms of surface area. We had seen in Russia, world's largest lake in terms of volume is Lake Baikal. All right, so Lake Superior is world's largest freshwater lake in terms of what? In terms of surface area. All right, and Lake Superior is between Canada and US. Lake Huron is also between Canada and US. All right. Similarly, Lake Erie is also shared by Canada and US, and Lake Ontario is also shared by Canada and US. All right. And here you will find the Niagara Falls, which is on the river called Niagara. Right. All of them on the border of Canada and US. So here is Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is completely inside United States. All right. Among the Great Lakes, only Lake Michigan is completely within US territory. And then you have major rivers of the US. This is the Mississippi River. All right. And this is the Missouri River. Right. So Mississippi and Missouri join together, and this river then flows as Mississippi. Right. And then forms a delta region also. So this is a significant agricultural region here. And then you cross what are called the Great Plains. So this would be called Midwest of the United States. Okay, the Midwest. So this is the rural hinterland, heartland of the United States, much different from both the coastal regions. All right, and a major mountain region here would be Rocky Mountain. But another important and very interesting feature is the Appalachian Mountains, right? So when the colonizers started moving towards the westward movement, expansion of US, they had to cross the Appalachian Mountain range. So Appalachian Mountains, and then Great Plains, and then this is the Rocky Mountains. All right, Rocky Mountains, right? And then the Cascade Range, Blue Mountains, Sierra Nevada Range, and then this is the coastal range, all towards the west. All right, and this is another major river, Colorado, right? The Colorado River, on which you will find features like the Hoover Dam, but also features like Grand Canyon in the United States. And then on the west coast, you have states like California, right? In terms of cultural preferences, there is difference between Midwest and Eastern Coast, and there is difference between Midwest and Western Coast, right? So generally, the coastal regions, East and West, are considered to be more liberal in orientation, and the heartland region is generally considered to be more conservative in orientation, and that is also seen in terms of voting pattern in United States. So you have the system of registration of voters. So you have a very large proportion of voters who already have declared their allegiance, right? Either have registered themselves as Democrats or registered themselves as Republicans. All right. Chaliye. Now, so this is United States. If you are interested, you can go and look it on your own map. But we will now move to the relationship in terms of looking at some of the questions that UPSC has asked, right? Because we have a general background understanding of the relationship. So we'll look at these questions. What questions did UPSC ask? 2019. So this is a question. This is a very traditional question. This question combines both, as we say, commonality of values, commonality of interests, but also historically the differences which have existed between India and United States. So what is this question? What introduces friction into the ties between India and United States is that Washington is still unable to find for India a position in its global strategy which would satisfy India's national self-esteem and ambitions. Statement, and statement is followed by explain with suitable examples. So what you have to explain is what are the commonalities of interest between India and US and commonality of values, but despite that, historically how India and US have diverged, and even now how there are differences on certain issues, and many a times India's interests are negatively affected by US approach. All right, so that is the meaning of it, कि दोनों देखने में लगता है कि दोनों को दोस्त होना चाहिए. Some people would say natural friendship. Why? Because both of them are democracies, right? Both of them are far away geographically, so no border issues, no major issues of territory between them. But while there has been cooperation, there has also been friction in the relationship. And UPSC simply said, explain with suitable examples. So these kinds of questions can be asked in terms of A, chronology, dividing in time periods, Cold War period relations, post-Cold War period relations. And in recent times you can find examples from areas of engagements. What are the differences in the current areas of engagements, right? So that is how you can answer this kind of a question. Now the next question is not directly related with United States, but about initiatives in which India and United States are part. So this is quadrilateral security dialogue is transforming itself into a trade bloc from a military alliance in present times. So first of all, this question was based on a lot of misconception. According to India's own official stance, Quad is not a military bloc. This is something that Dr. Jaishankar has said a lot of time, that Quad is not a military alliance. All right, Quad is a dialogue platform of like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific, dialogue between democracies of the Indo-Pacific, right? But still, when UPSC asks you this kind of a question, you forget everything else that you know, and you simply see that how can I make a case about Quad, which currently is a dialogue for multiple purposes between like-minded countries, into an economic bloc, right? So there, the trade data, for example, India-US trade, US being India's largest trading partner, or India-Japan trade, or India-Australia trade comes into play. You know these things. So these kinds of answers have to be constructed. Inka koi सीधा सीधा answer नहीं है. All right, these kinds of answers have to be constructed, right? We will see the answer of it. And then this is a comparative question about two important relations. 2020 UPSC asked, what is the significance of Indo-US defense deals over Indo-Russian defense deals? So it is a comparative question, right? Discuss with reference to stability in the Indo-Pacific region. So it is a context-specific question, all right? Any relationship, if you're talking about it, don't have a single point explanation for it. Look at the context. So in the Indo-Pacific, and we understand on the Indo-Pacific, India and US have commonality of views, India and Russia have differences in views, all right? So that we remember, and then after that, we bring in aspects of India-US defense relations and India-Russia defense relations, and thereby our conclusion cannot be that US relation is better and Russia relation is not so good, or vice versa. Our conclusion is simply that in this context, with US our partnership has greater value. But Russia traditionally is also India's important partner, and thereby India calls for what kind of an Indo-Pacific? If you would remember, free, open, but also India says inclusive Indo-Pacific. All right. So when you look at the questions are not never straightforward in the sense कि वो हमने पढ़ा वही हमको पढ़ाया गया वही आ गया. But आपने जो भी पढ़ा है उससे आप आंसर कंस्ट्रक्ट कर सकते हैं, right? 2021 UPSC asked a characteristically different question, in which the difference is here India is not mentioned directly. So first clue is that this is a 150 word question answer that you have to write. So first of all, you don't have much to write about, much to think about. So here the answer can be in terms of examples. So here the challenge is to build a structure which carries some historical background, a structure which carries some examples, and a structure in whose conclusion, if you can bring India, all right, if you can bring India in the conclusion, that would be a smart answer, right? So this was a question in which India was not mentioned directly, but this was not a difficult question because every one of us is an expert of international relations. हम सभी को पता होता है, right? खास तौर पे टीचर से ज़्यादा तो पता होता ही है, क्योंकि हम अपने अपने sources देख रहे थे. I was coming in the lift, so somebody was watching a video while coming in the lift. So we spend a lot of time on some of the issues. But the idea is that if you are reading newspaper in that particular year, or if you have been following international relations for the last 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, you know that this is a competition which is shaping up. So rather than getting in complicated in your mind, how would I prove it different from USSR, you simply understand, if USSR is mentioned, then some bit of history would come. Major part would focus on what kind of challenges China is posing to US. And towards the end of it, you will bring in India's interest, because India does not benefit from these kinds of competitions or domination by one power, two power of the world, right? And then this question again was a different question, where again the question is about not India directly, but again you have to understand and answer this question from the perspective of India's foreign policy, not US foreign policy. A statement: the newly tri-nation partnership AUKUS is aimed at countering China's ambitions in the Indo-Pacific region. Is it going to supersede existing partnerships in the region? First of all, So first of all, one thing, you notice AUKUS and you start writing about AUKUS. But did you notice that it also talks about other partnerships in the region? And one of the other partnerships in the region is Quad. Not only Quad, but now you see IPEF. All right, not only IPEF, but you see there is a cooperation between India, Japan, Australia. Not only that, there is also East Asia Summit. All right, so there are multiple forms of engagements going on in Indo-Pacific. Discuss the strength and impact of AUKUS in the present scenario. Right, so one part AUKUS, but major part Indo-Pacific, interest in Indo-Pacific. So there is ample opportunity to bring in India, because you understand India has its own Indo-Pacific approach. So this is one of the last relations. Why do we keep it as one of the last relations? Because in many of the relations, the reference of US has already come. When we have discussed many of the relations, reference of US has come. So there is sufficient familiarity with the US. Second, in many of the issues, we have referred to US related aspects. So now when we take US as the last relation, we get a clear understanding of that there are major bilateral aspects of engagements, but there are also what we can call regional and global aspects of engagements between India and US. That's why it is called a comprehensive global strategic partnership. So if we say shared interests or shared values, they have both an operation at the level of bilateral relations, but they are also operative at the level of beyond bilateral, regional and global. All right, and as I said, neither the syllabus is a watertight compartment nor the papers of GSR watertight compartments. You start thinking about linkages. How can you link what you learned in some other relation to this relation? All right, that is what you should start doing. How can you link what you have talked about or what you have learned in other subjects in this subject, right? That's the challenge that we have. And this year, UPSC asked another question in which US is a part, which is how will be the ITU2 India, Israel, UAE, USA grouping transform India's position in global politics? So again, we understand that this is an example of how India-US interactions transcend the bilateral. All right, and again, one part of understanding is that these kinds of interactions are based on what we call shared values and shared interests. So the larger terms that we use don't change. They are applicable in whatever you write. What would change is examples, specific examples. क्या हो रहा है इस context में, right? So these are the kind of questions that UPSC has asked, right? Now let's sir, also like Mr. Jaishankar recently was allowed to visit Pentagon, logistics sharing agreement, but US called India a ally. What is the difference between partner and ally? Ally is used loosely. Ally can mean friend. Ally can also mean partner. So when we say alliance and partner, so the difference is alliance is a much closer partnership. All right? Alliance is like a marriage. Partnership is like dating. All right? When you are dating, अभी final नहीं हुई ये चीजें. All right? When you are dating, after meeting, after talking, after having your food, you go back to your own homes. Right? When you are married, you go back to the same married household. All right? So alliances are much closer in terms of entanglement. And partnership is also a close relationship, but partnership has a certain amount of space in terms of decision making. So an example of alliance would be NATO. And you understand that NATO is based on one principle, which is collective security. Article 5 of NATO talks about collective security or collective defense, which has one meaning. That an attack on one would be considered an attack on all, meaning everybody would respond. So India does not want these kinds of partnerships, because हमारी लड़ाई एक से हो सकती है, लेकिन यूएस की लड़ाई किसी से भी हो सकती है. So we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we are fighting with the US wherever it is fighting. But partnership allows us to gain the benefits and avoid the avoid the entanglements. All right, US के साथ relation का एक साइड इफेक्ट भी है, इंटेंगलमेंट. यूएस वुड लाइक यू टू सपोर्ट इट एट ऑल द प्लेसेस. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, yesterday somebody asked कि अभी इंडिया ने इन UNGA बट इंडिया वोटेड अगेंस्ट रशिया. एक तो ये अखबार वाले हर चीज़ में अगेंस्ट रशिया फॉर रशिया करने लगते हैं. दिस इज इंडियाज पोजिशन. ऑल राइट. सो इंडिया वोटेड इन फेवर ऑफ अ रेजोल्यूशन which was opposed by Russia, and what was that resolution about? That resolution was about whether there should be open ballot or secret ballot on the question of referenda in the Ukraine or Russia. All right, Ukraine parts of Russia of eastern Ukraine which Russia has now annexed. तो उस पर वोट कैसा हो? ये प्रोसीडरल वोट हो गया, प्रोसीडरल वोट हो गया, सब्सटैंटिव वोट नहीं हुआ. तो हमारा रिश्ता ऐसा नहीं है कि हम हर चीज़ में रशिया के ही साथ जाके करें. तो हमने कहा कि प्रोसीडरल का क्वेश्चन है, छोटी सी बात है, इसमें क्या इंसिस्ट करना क्लोज या ओपन वोट. ओपन वोट होता है हमेशा, तो ओपन वोट होना चाहिए. ऑल राइट. एंड देन व्हेन द वोट केम विच वॉज क्रिटिकल ऑफ रशियाज अनेक्सेशन, इंडिया सेड हमारा क्या लेना देना है इससे. वी abstained from it. All right, we abstained from that substantive vote. In any case, votes at the UNGA are only a reflection of global opinion. They don't have any substantive value in terms of implementation, right? So we pick and choose, and that flexibility we would like कि रशिया बुरा मान जाएगा, right? But US बुरा मान जाता है, ऐसा हमको दिखता है, because US defines its interest so expansively, right? Sir, does our foreign policy maker will also be looking that US will engage with India once the China issue, let's say, ends? USA has a history of taking regional countries alongside to counter its competitors and then switch sides later on. So yes, that is true. We understand that. We understand that is the nature of it. Great powers have short span of interest. ये हम कहते हैं, हर country का interest होता है. Great powers have short span of interest. So history तो पढ़ते हैं ना. Foreign minister also studies history. Foreign secretary also studies history. All of us also study history. So we learn something from history. That no friendship is a natural friendship. ऐसा बहुत ज़्यादा लोग कहते हैं ना, natural friendship. There is no natural friendship. Friendship in international relations is based on context, the time that we are in, and in that time and context, what kind of interests we serve for each other. We don't harm each other's interests, and we benefit from the relation. So we know this, and that's why we don't necessarily try to go for alliance. All right? We try to go for partnership, because in partnership you have still scope for differences. In alliance अगर difference है भी तो भी you are bound to cooperate. In partnership that is not necessary. In partnership what would happen? आज नाराज़गी चल रही है तो वो कोई negotiation थोड़ा लंबा चल जाएगा. आज अगर वो खुश हैं, हम दोनों खुश हैं, तो वो negotiation का agreement जल्दी हो जाएगा. और क्या होगा? So international relations is all about you should not never be in a hurry. आप जल्दी में नहीं होने चाहिए. अगर आपको जल्दी है, so international relations is not for you, right? Then play some other game, right? Play T20, Ludo, don't play chess. All right? So that is something that you should understand. So we also understand that, and that's why when we start talking about India-US relations, these things start making sense. So yesterday we had said that there is a statement that we can use in our answers, that India and US have overcome hesitations of history. All right? To do what? To formulate what is a comprehensive global strategic partnership. So this is the journey that we have covered, from hesitations of history to now defining our relationship as a comprehensive global strategic partnership. All right? So this is something that we have done. So this gives you a sense of time, chronology. So if we see, hesitations of history can be seen in terms of Cold War era or Cold War period. All right? Cold War period. So in the Cold War period also, the commonality of values are there. For example, democracy. For example, if the World War was fought between Allied powers and Axis powers, India was, as part of British India, an Allied power. So we can say commonality of values or commonality of interests had existed, right? But then there was also divergence. Divergence in what sense? Divergence comes from many factors. The choices that these two countries make. right? So the choice that US made was based on its own strategic competition. With whom? With USSR. All right? And the choice that India made was non-alignment, all right, which later became reflected in non-aligned movements. Remember, non-alignment is a choice of foreign policy. Non-aligned movement is one of the results of that choice. All right, non-aligned movement is a movement of those countries which wanted to remain non-aligned in this period. So it's not a choice that only India is making. It's a choice that many other countries are making. And many other countries are inspired, influenced by India also in this choice. Why? Because in their calculation, they don't benefit from the strategic competition between US and USSR. All right? In competition between West and East, or what was called the First World and the Second World in terms of ideological orientation, preferences, choices, India largely fell in the category of third world. Third world का मतलब थर्ड क्लास नहीं होता है. थर्ड वर्ल्ड का मतलब होता है डिफरेंट फ्रॉम फर्स्ट एंड सेकेंड वर्ल्ड, बीच में हैं हम. ऑलराइट, तो कई बार ये नॉमेनक्लेचर से लगता है थर्ड वर्ल्ड, थर्ड क्लास. इसलिए गांधी जी ने कहा कि जो थर्ड क्लास है इंडियन रेलवे में उसको नाम चेंज कर देना चाहिए. सो देयर इज नो थर्ड क्लास इन इंडियन रेलवे. ऑलराइट, जनरल, उसके बाद स्लीपर, सेकेंड क्लास जनरली, उसके बाद एसी के डिफरेंट टीयर्स, राइट, 3 टीयर, 2 टीयर, 1 टीयर, राइट. सो थर्ड वर्ल्ड का मतलब थर्ड क्लास नहीं हुआ, कोई सुपीरियोरिटी और इंफीरियोरिटी का नोशन नहीं हुआ. इट मीन्स दैट दीज आर द कंट्रीज विच आर ट्राइंग टू रिमेन अवे फ्रॉम द कॉन्टेंशन बिटवीन ग्रेट पावर. इट्स द मिडिल पाथ दैट पीपल आर टेकिंग. सो देन both these first world and second world would see it as neutrality, which is fine, but the US would criticize it more seriously. So US would say that it is immoral. क्या अगर आप न्यूट्रल हैं किस चीज में, बिटवीन इन अ फाइट बिटवीन गुड एंड इविल. सो यूएस वाले हर चीज को डिफाइन करते हैं अ फाइट बिटवीन गुड एंड इविल, बीच का कोई चॉइस नहीं है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, under the George W. Bush era, when global war on terrorism started, there was a famous line that was stated that either you are with us or against us. So we don't want a world in which we have these two choices only, with us or against us. We want a world in which there are more choices. On some issues we are with you, on some issues we are not with you. And this should be an independent of choice. So here इनको लगता है that it is immoral. किसको लगता है? US को. US criticized India a lot on being non-aligned because US said कि आपको तो हमारे साथ होना चाहिए. This is a fight between democracies and tyranny. So ये बड़े बड़े वर्ड में भी US डिफाइन करता है चीज़ों को. हमारा कहना है कि भाई ठीक है, there are values are common, but that doesn't mean that on everything we would agree with you. और जनरली यही होता है, लोग इतनी बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं कि आपको इंडिपेंडेंट चॉइस करना मुश्किल हो जाता है. ऑलराइट, राइट. सो सम पीपल वुड से ये खतरे में है, सम पीपल वुड से वो खतरे में है, सम पीपल वुड से इतने 1000 साल से ये हुआ है, सम पीपल वुड से इतने 100 साल से वो हुआ है. तो आप इतनी बड़ी बड़ी जब चीज़ें सुनते हैं तो आपका दिमाग घूम जाता है कि नहीं 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 मुझे तो पोजीशन लेनी है. जबकि आपको ये याद रखना चाहिए दैट यू ऑलवेज हैव द चॉइस टू नॉट टेक अ पोजीशन. ऑलराइट, जैसे कोर्ट ऑफ लॉ में जाओगे तो देर इज अ प्रोटेक्शन दैट यू गेट, प्रोटेक्शन अगेंस्ट सेल्फ इंक्रिमिनेशन. नोबडी कैन फोर्स यू टू एक्सेप्ट what you have been accused of. You have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to silence. जैसे US में कहते हैं, US की मूवीज में इसको कहते हैं मिरांडा राइट्स. When you are arrested, you are read your rights. That you have the right to silence, you have the right to lawyer. All right. So that is something that we forget whenever. जब भी हम बड़ी बड़े शब्दों में चीज़ों को डिफाइन करने की कोशिश करते हैं तो वी फॉरगेट दैट वी हैव अ चॉइस. वी सडनली स्टार्ट फीलिंग दैट वी हैव टू टेक अ पोजिशन. राइट, समबडी कॉल्स अस इमोरल, हमको बुरा लगता है. सो देन वी स्टार्ट डिफेंडिंग आवरसेल्व्स विदाउट रियलाइजिंग सामने वाला अगर कोई बात कह रहा है तो उसमें उसका इंटरेस्ट क्या है. ऑलराइट, उसका इंटरेस्ट क्या है? पावर, वोट, ऑल राइट, आइडियोलॉजिकल डोमिनेशन, ग्लोबल डोमिनेशन। तो इसका मतलब ये है कि अगर उसका इंटरेस्ट है इन बड़ी बड़ी बातों करने में, तो हम भी बड़ी बड़ी बातें करके अपनी पोजीशन ले सकते हैं, राइट। सो दैट इज व्हाट एक्सप्लेन्स इंडियाज फॉरेन पॉलिसी स्टैंड्स। यूएन में हमने बड़ी बड़ी स्पीचेस दी हैं, आज भी हम बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं। हम क्या बात कर रहे हैं? इंडिया स्टैंड्स ऑन द साइड ऑफ पीस, इंडिया स्टैंड्स विद द साइड विच कॉल्स फॉर सेसेशन ऑफ हॉस्टिलिटी, इंडिया स्टैंड्स विद द पीपल हु आर अफेक्टेड बाय वॉर, ऐसा कहा फॉरेन मिनिस्टर ने यूएन के स्टेज पे। वाई? बिकॉज दिस इज इंडियाज पोजिशन, दिस इज नॉट अ पोजिशन ऑफ पर्सन ए पर्सन बी और पार्टी ए पार्टी बी, दिस इज इंडियाज पोजिशन। वाई? Because we always think that we are too important to be a junior partner to anyone, and that is something that is true in the case of relations with US also. US को आदत नहीं है इंडिया जैसे देशों के साथ काम करने की। US has either the habit of working with allies, all right, or junior partners. But India always says that no, we are not going to be a junior partner. हमको ये लगता है, we state कि हमको ये लगता है, हमको ये लगता है, हमको ये लगता है। इसलिए कभी कभी कहते हैं कि इंडियंस आर नोटोरियस निगोशिएटर्स, है ना। जैसे कि भाई हम हर चीज़ में जिद करते हैं, हम हर चीज़ में बहुत जल्दी एग्री नहीं करते, वी निगोशिएट वेरी हार्ड। सो दैट इज समथिंग दैट इज नॉट लाइक्ड बाई वेस्ट जनरली। इसीलिए हमको WTO में एक्यूज करते हैं कि इंडिया इज एन ऑब्स्ट्रक्शनिस्ट, ऑल राइट। या यूके के ट्रेड निगोशिएशंस के अंदर स्टेटमेंट्स कुछ जगह पे आपको पढ़ने में मिल जाएंगे कि इंडियंस आर नोटोरियस निगोशिएटर्स, नोटोरियसली प्रोटेक्शनिस्ट। भाई प्रोटेक्शनिस्ट तो हर कोई है, ऑल राइट। आपके इंटरेस्ट के हिसाब से प्रोटेक्शनिज्म हो रहा है तो आपको अच्छा लगता है, हम प्रोटेक्शनिज्म कर रहे हैं तो आपको बुरा लगता है। दैट्स बेसिकली द नेचर ऑफ द वर्ल्ड। सो व्हाई डू वी नेसेसरली साइड विथ पार्टी ए और पार्टी बी? देयर हैज टू बी अ रीजन। सो ग्रेजुअली नॉन अलाइनमेंट, दैट चॉइस दैट इंडिया मेड लेड टू even choices like Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation with USSR in 1971. All right. So some people would say India कहाँ non-aligned रह गया? India तो ally हो गया USSR का. So we say that this is not an alliance. All right. This is not an alliance. We are not becoming part of alliance. This is a choice made on the basis of the consideration of merit of the situation. Right. So we define non-alignment as, among other things, a choice of middle path, staying away from military rivalry, military alliances, military bloc, because that is something that did not suit us. And we also define non-alignment as a choice based on consideration of merit of the issue-based decision making. That is the kind of choice that non-alignment allowed us, right, in that point in time. When we signed Treaty of Friendship with USSR, certain things were very clear. For example, in the course of Cold War, we see examples of cooperation. For example, from the Second World War, when the Americans and the Britishers were fighting the Japanese, Kharagpur air base was used by the Americans also, all right, to launch war against or launch offensive against the Japanese, all right. We have examples of initial visits, all right. For example, Prime Minister Nehru's visit to US or President Eisenhower's visit to India, all right. ये भी है, initially ये भी हो रहा है, right. And then we have cooperation in programs like PL 480, Public Law 480, under which US provided us food grain, all right. ये cooperation भी है. But we also see what happens is that US has very scant understanding of India's choices. All right, US fails to understand why India makes such kind of choices, because for US the world is black and white. For us, against us, our interest or against our interest, right? So thereby we will see that for example, PL 480, the program was stopped under what is the Lyndon Johnson administration. When India criticized US, for example, on its involvement in Vietnam War, all right, India criticized US for its involvement in the Vietnam War, so US stopped the PL 480 program. तो ऐसा नहीं था कि कोई एहसान हो रहा है, Plus, as somebody had said, that with PL 480 wheat, the wheat was not very high quality, good quality. All right. With PL 480 wheat also came invasive species like the Congress grass, as somebody was mentioning yesterday. Right. So when we criticized US, we didn't receive help. So for example, during President Kennedy's time, and even before that, we sought help in the context of China. Now, we initially received some response. All right. For example, some people are very interested in कि नंदा देवी के पीक पे क्या है? Is there a nuclear transmitter, nuclear power transmitter there? So yes, in that particular point in time, there were talks of cooperation between India and US vis-a-vis China, because it largely fit in the US aim of containing communism. All right, because the Chinese had given them good beating in Korea. All right, USSR and US are fighting, and the Chinese came. All right, and Chinese came, and Chinese went back. So then, after Korea, North Korea coming under USSR influence and US receiving setback in Korea, the US said never again. We will not allow this to happen. So in that point in time, they are looking at China from that particular prism. So they are willing to cooperate with India. But we see that great powers have short-term interest or short span of interest. So we see that when the India-China war is going on, at the same time, the US interest is more on managing relations with USSR. Cuban Missile Crisis is also the product of the same period. So we don't see sustained cooperation taking roots, even though we may have been interested in cooperation with US. All right. Now, the cooperation is not taking root. Then we see that there is something called Sino-Soviet rift. If you would remember, we have talked about this earlier also. Differences developed between Soviet Union and China. All right, Soviet Union and China. So then what choices did the US make? So we see US opening up with China after this, meaning US is clearly acting on the basis of its interest. Its interest would be enemy of an enemy, and an enemy is a friend. USSR and China are no longer friends. यही है Sino-Soviet rift, differences emerging between USSR and China. So then US took this opportunity of opening up with China, including recognizing it, establishing formal relations, and helping it gaining a seat in the UN Security Council. So with the help of the Americans, the Chinese became a permanent member of the UNSC. All right. So then you will see that when this is happening, India has its own experience. India has its own experience of what kind? India has its own experience of a defeat at the hands of the Chinese. Of course, there are domestic factors responsible for it. We failed. But it is not very clear that even the US helped us to stave off a defeat vis-a-vis China. बात करते रहे वो, पर ऐसी कोई मदद नहीं आई. And then Sino-Soviet rift, they moved towards China when we have already China, which had declared its nuclear capabilities in 1967. India had sought nuclear umbrella, nuclear help from US. It did not come. So then we made a choice that we need externally a strong, powerful friend. Right? So we found that USSR generally was favorable towards India when it came to vote on issues like Jammu and Kashmir at the UN. USSR had a reason to befriend India because it had developed differences with China. All right, and China had moved towards USA. And India in this period also, remember, Pakistan had joined in this period US-led alliances like CENTO and SEATO. All right, so it is very clear that circumstances, choices, and major developments all meant that despite commonality of values, the larger interest of India and US did not align. All right, this is the Cold War reality. US criticized India for A, being non-aligned. It described it as an immoral choice. US criticized India for its friendship with USSR, and US also then sided with Pakistan on occasions like 1971 war, especially under the Nixon administration. All right, the Nixon administration के अंदर ही China, US are opening up, and Nixon is very critical of India, and simply because ये India वाले सुनते नहीं हैं. All right, so that is where you will see the history is playing out, right? So this is the choice that we are making, and our choices are not necessarily leading to the cooperation between both sides, right? So then we say there is the period called post-Cold War period, right? Post-Cold War period is characterized by collapse of USSR. So then you see the choice of non-alignment primarily was in the context of the world politics polarized between two blocks. So some people would say that either non-alignment did not make sense at that point in time, and certainly non-alignment does not make sense after the end of Cold War, right? So non-alignment is criticized. यहाँ से देख के हम पीछे देखते हैं, कहते हैं वो गलत चॉइस था, बट यहाँ से देख के पीछे देख के हम यही कह सकते हैं कि हो सकता है वो चॉइस ऐसा था जो ब्रॉडली सूटेड आवर रिक्वायरमेंट एट दैट पॉइंट इन टाइम. ऑलराइट, दोनों ही चीज़ें हम सोच सकते हैं. अगर हम बहुत ज़्यादा पार्टिजान नहीं हो गए हैं तो ऑलराइट. एक होता है पॉलिटिकल होना. पॉलिटिकल होना इज फाइन बिकॉज यू आर आस्किंग क्वेश्चंस, यू वांट टू नो. एंड एक होता है पार्टिजान होना, मतलब आपने अपनी आंखें बंद कर ली हैं, आपको एक ही तरह का सच जानना है, विच डज नॉट हेल्प इन इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस. इट मे हेल्प इन अदर एरियाज, डज नॉट हेल्प इन इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस. सो आपको अगर किसी पार्टी का स्पोक्स पर्सन बनना है तो आप नैरेटिव से पिक एंड चूज कर सकते हैं एग्जाम्पल्स. अगर आपको समझना है तो आपको समझना होगा कि अल्टीमेटली वी आर ऑल ह्यूमन बींग्स, वी मेक मिस्टेक्स, देयर इज नो बडी हु इज इनफॉलिबल. इतना गुस्सा होने की जरूरत नहीं है. सो यू कैन क्रिटिसाइज मिस्टर नेहरू, मिस्टर गांधी, you can criticize anyone and everyone, nobody has stopped you, this is a democratic country, but this would not give you the explanation that you are looking for. All right, ना ही ये solution देगा आपको, आपको ये आनंद देगा, but not the solution. All right, okay, so you have to decide what you have to do. I am nobody to advise you to what to do, but we say that after the end of Cold War, which is defined by collapse of USSR, thereby also end of what is called bipolarity. All right, so what is it that characterized Cold War period? Bipolarity. Bipolarity meaning polarization of global politics between two camps. So end of this is defined by the end of bipolarity as the situation of international relations, and some people say this is the unipolar moment, meaning now, for example, some scholars like Francis Fukuyama, सुना है आपने नाम फ्रांसिस फुकुयामा? ऑल राइट, कोई बात नहीं, नहीं सुना है तो आप सुन लिया ना आपने, फ्रांसिस फुकुयामा, राइट. सो दे आर टॉकिंग अबाउट यूनिपोलर मूवमेंट, एंड ऑफ हिस्ट्री. एंड ऑफ हिस्ट्री का मतलब क्या है कि अब तो हिस्ट्री में कोई बड़ा क्वेश्चन बचा ही नहीं, बिकॉज the liberal democratic ideology, free market economy ideology has won. There is no other alternative. All right, so human beings have reached to the apogee, to the peak of their ideological evolution. Now there is only one choice. तो एक तो मतलब ये हो गया. दूसरा मतलब हो गया, चार्ल्स क्रॉथहैमर नाम के एक स्कॉलर है, he said unipolar movement. Now US is decisively the only super power, major power in the world. अमेरिका वाले उस समय से बहुत कॉन्फिडेंस में आ गए, राइट. बट दीज आर ऑल वेज ऑफ डिस्क्राइबिंग थिंग्स. ये कभी भी पूरा सच नहीं होता. क्यों पूरा सच नहीं हो सकता? बिकॉज ह्यूमन सिस्टम्स, ह्यूमन सिचुएशंस आर ऑलवेज कॉम्प्लेक्स. बट व्हाट व्हाई वी यूज दीज काइंड्स ऑफ टर्म्स टू डिस्क्राइब, मेजरली क्या बोल सकते हैं हम इसके बारे में. ऑल राइट, सो यूनिपोलर मूवमेंट. सो देन increasingly we see that A, first of all, the logic of the situation has changed. B, we see objective conditions have changed. And these are very essential in change in choices, the kind of choices that we are making. So some scholars would argue that non-alignment doesn't make sense now because there is nothing to be non-aligned against, all right, or non-aligned for, meaning there are no two blocks, right? Then what is happening? Collapse of USSR for India means few other things. External situation has changed. In that external situation, USSR was our major partner, major defense partner, major economic partner. For example, rupee-ruble trade existed between India and USSR, which helped us in, for example, payment of oil from Iraq. All right, Iraq was also a partner of USSR. So USSR is no longer there, and then we are facing our own economic crisis. In that situation, what India's choice is, largely we can say India's choice, we say that this phase of foreign policy, if you have read the first chapter of the printed material, India's foreign policy choices are forced to be pragmatic. We say that this is the era of pragmatism, which means that political issues are now in the background and economic interests are the driver of foreign policy. Foreign policy choices are being made in the context of one broad reality, that India needs to focus on its economy. India needs technology. India needs economic cooperation, investments, foreign direct investment in this particular period. So thereby, our choice is very clear that India now is facing a situation where it has diverse choices available, where it has diverse relations available, right? The field is open to make these choices. Diversity of choices in terms of the kinds of cooperation that we will undergo, right? So that's why this period, you see, is defined by some features like India joining the WTO in 1995, or domestically we undertaking what is called liberalization, privatization, globalization. Largely our requirements are investments and technology. All right. So in a sense, India's foreign policy since 1991 is driven by India's economic interests, in which political issues, for example, in the Cold War period, political issues are primary. For example, issues of the third world, that we have a common interest. For example, under NAM, non-aligned movement, India and other countries stood for what is called the New International Economic Order, NIEO, which means more equitable order, an order reflecting the interest of developing countries, right? So thereby you will see that India became a champion of third world issues, developing countries issues, and India was at the forefront of criticizing the domination of the West, or the domination of the first world or the second world, right? So these are political issues. So now we are saying these political issues are fine, but our focus should be on economic issues, technology, investments. That is our priority, right? And that is not coming because somebody has a change of heart. That is coming because objective conditions have changed, right? The prevailing realities have changed, and thereby choices have to change. Nobody changes their choice so easily, right? So diverse relations. So we see that in this period, again, a choice that we have is of maintaining our strategic autonomy, diversifying our options, cooperating with multiple countries, but at the same time safeguarding our strategic autonomy. What is strategic autonomy? Strategic autonomy is independence of decision making, all right? The ability to take relatively independent decisions on the matters of national interest. So be it in the Cold War period or in the post-Cold War period, India's foreign policy would always look for one thing: whether a particular relationship is constraining its choices or enabling its choices. All right? Meaning, at any point in time, foreign policy would be interested in defending, safeguarding the scope, space for independent decision making. All right? Right? So non-alignment was a choice in the context of our experience, that 200 years of colonial rule meant that the decisions of our interests were being taken not in India, but in other parts of the world, right? Who was taking our decisions? The Britishers, all right? The interest of Manchester Mills received priority over the interest of Indian farmers or Indian handloom industry, for example, all right? So that's why non-alignment as a choice. Non-alignment as a choice of safeguarding the space for independent decision making, all right? इसको आप ऐसे समझ सकते हैं. And then after post-Cold War period, we move towards the engagement with other countries for interests like economic interests or technology interests. But there also we would not like any relationship which comes at the cost of independence of decision making. Strategic autonomy we want to defend. What is strategic autonomy? Ability to take relatively independent decisions on the matters of national interest. So this is who we are, this is who we define ourselves as, and thereby what you see is that while still in this period you will find that A, the conditions, B, the requirements, C, the shared values call for closer partnership between India and US, but it does not happen automatically. इतनी जल्दी नहीं होता, आदतें बदलने में time लगता है. So we will see this period is defined by, again, certain issues on which India is not very happy. For example, 1996, US pressurizes India to sign CTBT, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, a nuclear treaty which bans nuclear testing in all environments. All kinds of nuclear testing is banned by CTBT, all right? And India is not willing to sign the CTBT, and US criticizes India. US is not happy with India, right? Or on the matter of Jammu and Kashmir, US still takes positions which are critical of India, or positions which are for the purpose of placating Pakistan. For example, President Clinton described South Asia to be one of the most dangerous regions in the world, right? And in the context of Jammu and Kashmir. So again, it is not automatically happening. And then 1998, what happens? India's nuclear tests. And nuclear tests again are not liked by the US. So nuclear tests are followed by US sanctions, US led sanctions. US and many of the Western countries sanction India, all right? So this is what we see remains the case in the post-Cold War period also. Our choices are changing. Situation has changed. A diverse landscape is available to us in terms of choices and relationship, but it takes time, right? In international relations, everything takes time. आज जो हो रहा है उसको हम 20 साल बाद तक एनालाइज करते रहेंगे. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इवन नाउ वी से वी आर इन दी पोस्ट कोल्ड वॉर पीरियड. कितने साल हो गए? 1991 to 2021, 30 years, right? So sometimes we talk about post Cold War period, right? But we don't know what this post Cold War period would look like, all right? We don't know what exactly is the nature of post Cold War period, right? So that is something that you should understand in terms of international relations, that there is always a significant degree of uncertainty. So here we are saying that situation has changed, but the approach needs change. So we see that after 1998, India and US start nuclear talks, all right, which is talk between, from India, Mr. Jaswant Singh, and from US, Straub Talbot. These are two people who engage. So India-US nuclear talks begin. Nuclear talks in the sense, US is involved in advocating CTBT. US wants North Korea to give up nuclear weapons, है ना? So आज भी देखो कि दुनिया भर में US is involved in some sort of dialogue. For example, right now, a dialogue between Iran, European Union, Russia, China, France and UK, right? And US on the other hand. All right, it is called the Vienna talks. अभी हो रहे हैं किस चीज पे? ईरान के न्यूक्लियर इशू पे. So America in this period C is looking at itself as the चौधरी of the world. All right, that हम हर चीज ठीक करेंगे. जैसे अभी नेशनल सिक्योरिटी स्ट्रैटेजी आई है यूएस की, वैसे उस समय की नेशनल सिक्योरिटी स्ट्रैटेजी डिफाइन करती है यूएस की वैल्यूज को प्रमोट करना. Certain values have to be promoted in international relations under presidents like President Clinton, because US is in that phase कि अब तो हम जीत चुके हैं. All right, अब हमारी जिम्मेदारी है दुनिया भर को सिखाना. So nuclear talks begin, right, to create understanding. And then what you see is in the year 2000, at the last, in the last leg of his presidency, President Clinton visits India. All right, Bill Clinton, who is known for many other things, but he visits India. He is a two-term president at that point in time, a young president. All right, so we see that things are now changing in the context of interests increasingly converging. What are the interests? So we see A, there are clearly economic interests. What interests? US, remember, is a unique economy in terms of the role of private sector. If you are dealing with the US, you are dealing with A, the president and his administration which is in power. You are dealing with a legislature which is the Congress, which may have a different composition of power. All right, president may come from one party, but his party may not have a majority in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. So you are dealing with the Congress, and you are dealing with the public opinion and special interests. For example, lobbying is legal in US. Lobbying for commercial interest is legal in US. So clearly, one of the interests that drives US cooperation is its commercial interest, economic interest. In what? In India's market. All right, so India under the new phase of its economic reforms is an attractive market. Still protectionist to a large measure, but an attractive market. It is opening up, right? Similarly, India has shown some achievements, for example, in the IT sector, right? So a large number of Indians are involved in this one boom. Remember, 1990s is the era of internet boom, all right, which later led to what is called dot-com bubble. But this is the era of IT or ICT becoming a major driver of economy in countries like United States. And in that, Indians are recognized for their talent or expertise. All right, so that is, in this particular sector, India's achievements are attractive. All right, and then gradually what you will see is US after USSR, because Russia at that point in time is confused, as we have seen when we are talking about Russia. Russia has become very inward looking in this particular period, to the extent that US believes that Russia can be made a part of the Western camp. Ab to Russia change ho gaya. So their next challenge, where would it come from? So as we say, divergence of interest, divergence of values. So if US looks at China, what it looks at is a country with divergent values. What values? US still says that we stand for democracy, human rights, etc. China is a single party ruled authoritarian state. All right, and then you have issues like the Taiwan issue, which have never been resolved. China has a different position, meaning China says one China policy. Taiwan should be part of China. All right, and US has over the years downgraded its relations with Taiwan, but never completely let go of it. All right, meaning it still has commitments to Taiwan in terms of helping it, right? So long-term calculation means that due to divergence of values, differences on issues, China is going to be the next strategic challenge to the United States. It's very clear to United States at that point in time, and India, because of its own reasons, has cause to be concerned about China. So these are the things which are generally bringing about a change in this relationship, realization of economic potential or India's own attractiveness because of its achievement in the IT sector, services sector, or because of their larger identification of China as a strategic threat because of their own reasons. So you see, situation is changing. Conversations between India and United States are enhancing, increasing, and you will see in this particular period, 1999 for example, when the Kargil crisis took place, Pakistani Prime Minister Mr. Nawaz Sharif visited US without invitation, but he was disappointed because US refused to intervene on its behalf, and it was told clearly that it should withdraw, right? And that is happening in this particular context. Times have changed, interests are now converging, and thereby you will see that Bill Clinton visited India. So this was a presidential visit after a very long time. And earlier the case was, we say that US policy towards India and Pakistan was a hyphenated policy. Meaning what? Meaning if a US president is coming to India, he would also go to Pakistan. All right? If a US president is coming to India, he will spend more time in Pakistan. All right? So in a sense, US viewed these two relations to be related, to be linked. That is the meaning of hyphenated policy. All right? But here, Bill Clinton spent 5 days in India and 5 hours in Pakistan, right? Including he went to Hyderabad. At that point in time, Mr. Chandrababu Naidu was the chief minister. So he visited Cyberabad. That's why you would see companies like Microsoft. At that point in time, Mr. Raju also was there. Kaun se Raju? Satyam Raju, all right, of the Satyam computers. So that is something that is visible in this particular point in time. And then after this, in 2004, India and US sign a strategic partnership agreement. Strategic partnership agreement is signed between India and US in 2004, right? So here you have the president called George W. Bush. George W. Bush, under George W. Bush, you see mainly the US foreign policy is much more militaristic and much more involved in what is called democracy promotion. All right? So Iraq, Afghanistan, many other places, US is militarily involved. And in that context, we remember Mr. Bush not so favorably, but in another context, we remember him favorably. He came to India. Mr. Manmohan Singh, आजकल हम प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी को देखते हैं, गले मिलना और हाथ मिलाना उनका स्टाइल है. So Mr. Manmohan Singh went to the airport as Prime Minister to receive George W. Bush when he came to India. And he said, Dr. Manmohan Singh generally बहुत सारी चीज़ें कहते नहीं थे, but he said, Mr. Bush, India loves you. All right, so it was also criticized very much कि ऐसा कैसे भाई. US is not a very easy friend to have. ये याद रखो, because wherever US has gone, it has not exactly won hearts. है ना, हर जगह उनकी हिस्ट्री यही है कि बम गिरा के आए हैं. So somebody or the other doesn't remember them very kindly, right? So US is not a very easy friend to have, अगर किसी को ऐसा लगता हो. But still, our relations are moving. Under George W. Bush, there is much more keenness in improving these relations, right? So this is where we see the relationship start moving in a direction where first of all, both sides have an intent of developing strategic partnership. For example, in 2005, India and US sign a framework agreement for defense cooperation, right? Framework agreement on defense cooperation. It seems एक कल ही हुआ था, right? 20 साल हो गए मुझे फॉरेन पॉलिसी जैसी चीज़ों को देखते हुए, बट इट स्टिल सीम्स कि कल ही हुआ था. जब हम इस तरह से बात करते हैं कि इस समय ये हुआ, इस समय ये हुआ, पर जब उस समय हो रहा था, सो देन इट डिडंट मेक सेंस वेरी क्लियरली. बहुत सारी चीज़ें जब आप पीछे से देखते हैं ना, दूरी से, with the perspective of time, it start making sense. All right. So framework agreement for defense cooperation happened, and then we see another major change in this relationship was 2008 civil nuclear agreement. Now this was a major agreement which we can say was a sign of transformation of India-US relations, that India-US relations finally have taken a turn. It took time. After the end of Cold War, the only thing that I'm saying is it took time for India and US to build a constructive engagement. Initially क्या हुआ? The pattern of Cold War continued. But then gradually basically because we already have convergence of values, उसमें कोई doubt नहीं है. Then second thing is always the context, the external environment, the global environment. Right? So that also is now favorable for India-US cooperation. And apart from that, the interests. So majorly our interests economically or technologically or strategically, geostrategically are converging. Right? और इसके बाद 1992 की मालाबार एक्सरसाइज छूट गई सर. मालाबार एक्सरसाइज भी कर लेंगे, हर चीज का एग्जाम्पल देने की जरूरत नहीं है. एग्जाम्पल हम मालाबार एक्सरसाइज का डिफेंस में यूज करेंगे. हम जनरली समझ सकते हैं कि इस पीरियड में कुछ कोशिश हो रही है, कोशिश बाई एंड लार्ज होती है, लेकिन फिर मेनली फ्रिक्शन रहता है. उसके बाद क्या होता है? कोऑपरेशन का पीरियड हमको दिखने लगता है. 2008 सिविल न्यूक्लियर एग्रीमेंट. Now this agreement is important because it did a lot of things for us. When this agreement was being signed also, there was a lot of contention in Indian politics, right? The left, the right, all right? The Communist Party and the Bharatiya Janata Party were critical of this agreement. And some people say that this is one agreement behind which Manmohan Singh stood very strongly, right? Because many people in his own party did not like this agreement. There were arguments like India is in a way compromising on its sovereignty by signing this agreement. और ये बहुत क्लियर है खास तौर पे मुझे कि these kinds of arguments when they are taking place, they are so serious arguments that you are afraid of them and you think that you have to be on one side or the other side. But you always remember that you have time to think about it. And these kinds of arguments came because simply India-US relations historically had never been smooth. So we also didn't have an experience of working with the US. They also didn't have an experience of working with us. All right? So that's why whenever you are making a new friendship, you will always be very tentative. कि इसका परिणाम क्या होगा? Right? So when this agreement was signed, what happened was, one, it was a sign of deepening of trust in India-US relations, that we trust each other, right? It was also important in the context of help in ending India's technology isolation, right? It at that point in time was also sold as or advocated for clean energy option, that it provides India a clean energy option. At that point in time, our nuclear reactors were running low on fuel, all right, running low on fuel, right? And the international technology regime was such that we had not signed the NPT, Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, we had not signed Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Of course, we are not part of the NSG. So, अब हमको कोई ना तो न्यूक्लियर टेक्नोलॉजी बेचेगा ना कोई न्यूक्लियर फ्यूल बेचेगा, all right? So then the arguments are being made in this context. For example, George W. Bush's administration is arguing in the US. US Congress के अंदर बहुत सारे लोग oppose करेंगे, right? So support came from the presidency, president's administration. President is behind this agreement. Support came from US private sector. US के जो nuclear vendors हैं वो इंडिया के मार्केट में को अट्रैक्टिवली देखते हैं कि ये एक मार्केट है जो अनटैप्ड है, यहाँ पे रिएक्टर बेचने का मौका मिलेगा, right? And then larger arguments are made. What arguments? That first of all, this will give India a clean energy option, and it will help India in taking more responsibility in terms of global climate change negotiations. All right. B, it will give India an alternative in its energy basket. It would help India in reducing its oil purchases from Iran. And remember, Iran and US don't see eye to eye. So ऐसे इस agreement को बेचा गया. और तीसरा रोल प्ले किया, फॉर एग्जाम्पल वी से दिस एग्रीमेंट अ मेजर रोल ऑफ इंडियन डायस्पोरा. इंडियन डायस्पोरा एडवोकेटेड इंडियाज case. They wrote to their congressmen, they wrote to their senators to support this agreement. All right. So this agreement also, in a sense, was an acknowledgement of India's responsible track record where, in terms of proliferation of weapons, right, in terms of proliferation of nuclear technology. So without signing the NPT, without compromising much on our interests, with this agreement we were able to normalize our nuclear commerce. All right. जैसे you get a character certificate from the police और एन ऑफिशियल, और कोई बड़ा आदमी आपके इलाके का आपके साथ खड़ा हो जाए तो बहुत सारा अपोजिशन कम हो जाता है, राइट. सो देन दिस इज द चॉइस दैट वी एक्सरसाइज्ड, एंड हियर यूएस प्रूव टू बी हेल्पफुल. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, India still was not required to sign the NPT. All right, so we were able to avoid that. B, we received a waiver from NSG because NSG कहेगा कि न्यूक्लियर कॉमर्स करने के लिए एक देश को NPT साइन करना चाहिए. All right, so we did not sign the NPT. We received a waiver from NSG. Waiver का मतलब exception. And then we signed an India specific safeguard agreement with the IAEA. All right, safeguard agreement with IAEA, meaning we were able to, some people say that this is too good an agreement to have. पाकिस्तान ने कहा कि हमको भी ऐसा एग्रीमेंट दो, इंडिया को क्यों दे रहे हो, हमको भी दो. So it was an agreement which we can say that you can eat your cake and have it too. All right. So India benefited much more in terms of first of all, being able to defend its core principles that we will not sign the NPT. India then was also able to ensure that it is able to normalize itself, its situation in global nuclear commerce, civilian nuclear commerce. क्यों? Because at that point in time, US being a member of NSG, our own diplomacy plus the help of the US, including US convincing China, all right, for NSG to grant us a waiver. All right. What kind of waiver? We have not signed the NPT and yet we are allowed to participate in nuclear commerce. And India signed a safeguard with IAEA. IAEA is International Atomic Energy Agency. It's a scientific body. It has two primary roles. One, to develop safeguards, meaning a scientific role, develop safeguards in the use of nuclear technology, because nuclear technology has multiple usage. All right. So civilian usage जो भी हैं उसको उसके इस्तेमाल में जो scientific standards हैं, they are generally guided by IAEA regulations. Secondly, its role is to ensure that NPT is being implemented and these safeguards are being implemented when countries are engaging in civilian nuclear activity. So it is engaged in inspections, all right, inspecting the implementation of civilian nuclear programs of countries, whether they are in consonance with the global requirements or not, scientific standards or not, but also NPT standards or not. तो आपको कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा, तो safeguard sign करना होता है, तो या तो full scope safeguard, पर इंडिया ने साइन किया इंडिया स्पेसिफिक सेफगार्ड। इसका मतलब सिंपल यही था कि नाउ वी हैव टू कैटेगरीज ऑफ nuclear installations, one civilian, another military. So we separated them, and then on military we did not accept any safeguards, and on civilian nuclear installations we opened it to IAEA safeguards. All right, so IAEA safeguards are applicable on civilian nuclear reactors. And then what kind of safeguards? So for example, safeguards generally ensure that if you have a nuclear reactor, the spent fuel like plutonium is a fissile material. All right, so it can be used for making nuclear weapons as well. So inspection, which ensures how spent material is being used, right? Secondly, inspection in terms of sharing of information, whether we are exporting any nuclear टेक्नोलॉजी यानी न्यूक्लियर फ्यूल और नॉट, इस तरह के सेफगार्ड्स हमने एक्सेप्ट किए. सो सिविलियन न्यूक्लियर रिएक्टर्स आर अंडर IAEA सेफगार्ड्स, ऑलराइट, नॉट फुल स्कोप सेफगार्ड्स बट only India specific safeguards. All right, civil military nuclear reactors are not under any safeguards, so they are not inspected. So thereby it means that India can use imported uranium for its civilian programs, and we reserve our domestic uranium reserve for military programs. All right, and for this we signed a protocol, separate protocol with the IAEA. So this is something that happened, and after that we see series of nuclear agreements being signed with Russia 2009, with France 2009. All right, and we have signed nuclear agreements with Japan 2016, Australia 2014, right, either for fuel or technology, right? So we will remember with before the break that global civilian nuclear commerce is governed by certain larger agreements. What larger agreements? Such as NPT. All right, and then there are certain special groups of countries which are important nuclear suppliers, either suppliers of nuclear reactors, nuclear technology, or nuclear fuel. They have formed a separate group called the NSG, Nuclear Suppliers Group. Nuclear Suppliers Group 1974 में बना, after India's first nuclear test. All right, so global agreements plus special groupings of countries like NSG, they are instrumental in ensuring or preventing nuclear commerce. So India is not a member of NSG. India has not signed the NPT, yet India is eligible for nuclear commerce. Why? Because first of all, we negotiated a free trade agreement, a nuclear agreement with USA. All right, civil nuclear agreement, not free trade agreement, civil nuclear agreement. मैं फिर से दोहरा रहा हूँ. All right. Then here the US Congress, for example, passed what is called the 123 Act, meaning US made changes in its domestic law. US domestic law stipulates that civil nuclear commerce is not allowed with countries who have not signed the NPT. All right, एक तो हमने ये किया, दूसरा हमने साथ ही में क्या किया, ये किया, we achieved a waiver from NSG. This waiver meant that we were allowed not to sign the NPT. चलो NPT साइन नहीं करते कोई बात नहीं, लेकिन कुछ तो करो. So ये कुछ तो करो क्या था? Signing a safeguard agreement with IAEA. So specific, India specific safeguard agreement we have signed, not full scope safeguard, and we ratified the protocol with the IAEA, which means in effect India on its own decided which facilities would be under safeguard. So civilian facilities of India are under safeguards or open to inspection by IAEA. Another commitment that we have is that we exchange the information on nuclear exports. हम करते ही नहीं है तो हमको बहुत ज़्यादा चिंता करने की ज़रूरत है नहीं, right? And we remember that's why military installations which have been separated use domestic fuel, domestic uranium. UPSC has asked at least 4 questions related with this. all right, related with these issues. All easy questions to answer once you have understood this. So we will stop here, and after that we will come back, and from here now अब हम समझ गए कि एक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन हो गया, all right, India US relations पे. So now we will see the areas of engagement from defense to economy to other areas of engagement, right? So this was simply to give you an idea of the history of relations. You can read the history in the printed material also, right? What we have talked about has been covered there as well, right? Here is a break. Okay, please come back, settle down. Please come back. And let me resolve some of the issues. तो राहुल वर्मा का कहना है भाई ये बोर्ड से नोट बना रहे हो या सिनॉप्सिस से, कहीं से भी बनाइए. बोर्ड पे जो मैं लिख रहा हूँ उसको लिखने की कोशिश कीजिए, कुछ छूट रहा है तो आपस में पूछ लीजिए जैसा बाकी लोग करते हैं. फ्रेमवर्क ज़रूर नोट कर लीजिएगा जो क्लास के शुरुआत में मैं बताता हूँ. फ्रेमवर्क ही आपके साथ रहेगा, कहानी नहीं रहती. दूसरा, ये जो है प्रिंटेड मटेरियल में पार्ट 2 का पेज नंबर 28, part 2 page number 28, you start with the US, all right. So here in background what we have talked about is written is there, and you can make use of this also. By and large the framework is still valid. The areas wherever there is any new data to be added, I generally do that, all right. So please remember that. Now, let's start by looking at the areas of engagements between India and US, right? So I'll very simply revise what I have said, and I acknowledge whatever you have said here. For example, India-Iran relationship suffered because of USA. Adeshwar Mishra का कहना है, I agree with you, it suffered, but that cannot be the only thing. What will be the impact of India-US relation when India abstains from voting against China? Even there is dispute India-China. So simple voting does not, change the equations. Simple voting does not change the equation. The voting always is a part of a complex pattern, which by and large follows India's preference. India is not going to change its voting preference simply, all right? And whenever we change our voting preference, for example, voting against voting against Iran in IAEA in 2009, we remember that we have something more to gain. Here is the period when we are talking about civil nuclear agreement. So we always calculate what is there to be gained, and if there is something very substantive to be gained, we may see changes in India's voting pattern. Otherwise, India votes in the similar pattern. Why? Because it becomes easier to defend it. किसी को भी हम बोल सकते हैं कि भाई देखो ऐसे ही हम वोट करते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, वी डोंट वोट इन फेवर ऑफ कंट्री स्पेसिफिक resolutions generally, but if there are exceptions we would always explain it or you understand it in terms of context. तो क्वेश्चन ये नहीं होना चाहिए कि वोट से क्या रिलेशन पे असर पड़ेगा. वी विल सी डिफरेंसेस हैं प्लस कॉमनैलिटी है. सेकेंड, that USA stand on Kashmir initially and also on terrorism until 2001 was always against India. We can say different. We had a different approach on terrorism, and US's approach towards Kashmir was more sympathetic towards Pakistan. All right, that is the historic development of relations. Right, let's move forward and let's simply revise what we have done. So India and US, in course of developing their relations in the 21st century, have crossed multiple milestones. For example, they had started a nuclear dialogue in 1998, Stroop-Talbot, Jaswant Singh dialogue. Then some visits, for example, the visit of President Clinton and then subsequently the visit of President George W. Bush also started reflecting the desire of both countries to engage with each other closely. That translated into the 2004 Strategic Partnership Agreement. That was followed by a framework cooperation agreement on defense in 2005, and that was followed by a major agreement, which was why major agreement? Because it was difficult agreement. difficult agreement to sign. All right, because our positions were too divergent on that. For example, US domestic law banned any nuclear trade, and nuclear trade is only possible in civilian areas. That is something that you should remember for once and for all. When we say nuclear trade or civil nuclear agreement, it is not about nuclear weapons. It is only for the peaceful use of nuclear technology, which is broadly in the areas of health or particle physics research, science and technology, all right, or power production, energy, right? So even this requires significant relations in terms of technology and fuel. अब वो पॉसिबल नहीं था हमारे लिए इसलिए क्योंकि हम दुनिया में जो मेजर चीजें हैं उनसे डिसएग्री करते थे. वी डिडंट साइन द एनपीटी 1970. व्हाई? बिकॉज वी से एनपीटी इज डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी. नंबर वन. ऑल राइट, व्हाट इज एनपीटी? डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी. व्हाई? बिकॉज एनपीटी अलाउज सम कंट्रीज टू रिटेन न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स. 5 countries are recognized as nuclear powers under the NPT. Which are these 5 countries? The P5. All right. इनके न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स लीगल हैं, बाकी के न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स इलीगल है, नहीं हो सकते हैं एनपीटी के हिसाब से. तो इंडिया का कहना है कि दिस इज डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी इफ इट इज अबाउट द नॉन प्रोलिफरेशन और इवन डिसआर्मामेंट ऑफ न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स. इट शुड बी यूनिवर्सल. सबके लिए एक कानून लागू होना चाहिए, ऐसा हमारा कहना है. So that's why NPT is discriminatory, because it has 2 categories: nuclear weapon states, nuclear non-nuclear weapons states. ऐसे देश जिनके पास न्यूक्लियर वेपन है, यानी कि 70 से पहले जिन्होंने न्यूक्लियर टेस्ट कर लिया उनको न्यूक्लियर वेपन स्टेट रिकॉग्नाइज कर लिया एनपीटी ने. 70 के बाद जो भी करता है उसको एनपीटी के अंदर ये रिकॉग्निशन नहीं है. सो 5 न्यूक्लियर वेपन स्टेट्स, बाकी सारे नॉन न्यूक्लियर वेपन स्टेट्स. इंडिया सेज इट इज डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी, राइट? ऑन प्रिंसिपल इट इज डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी. दिस इज नॉट just. Second, in our calculation, NPT constrains our strategic choices. All right, NPT constrains our strategic choices. What strategic choices? Strategic choice is very simple, that while we have a nuclear capable neighbor, China, we cannot foreclose our option of developing nuclear weapons ever. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि हम ऐसा कोई एग्रीमेंट साइन कर लें जिसके आधार पे हम बाद में न्यूक्लियर वेपन डेवलप नहीं कर पाए. So it constrained our strategic choice. So because of these 2 things, on the basis of principle that it is discriminatory, on the basis of constraint on our strategic choices, we chose not to sign the NPT. उसके बाद हमने क्या किया? In 1974 we tested nuclear device. Buddha is smiling. All right. So we tried to define it still as peaceful, but हर किसी को पता था कि it's a nuclear weapons testing. All right. We declared that we have the capability of developing nuclear weapons. So 1974 में जब हमने ये किया, so then major countries came together and formed what is called the NSG, right? Nuclear Suppliers Group. All right? ये कौन है? ये वो देश हैं जिनके पास ये कैपेबिलिटी है न्यूक्लियर टेक्नोलॉजी एक्सपोर्ट करने की, न्यूक्लियर फ्यूल एक्सपोर्ट करने की. सो इट्स अ कार्टेल, लेट्स से, ऑफ न्यूक्लियर सप्लायर्स. सो नाउ दे केम टुगेदर फॉर टाइटर कंट्रोल ऑन न्यूक्लियर एक्सपोर्ट्स. एंड दे वुड ऑल्सो से that for being eligible for nuclear exports, countries must follow certain common minimum standards. So they borrow their standards from the NPT, and thereby they rely on the IAEA as the scientific body to ensure that NPT related standards, safety related standards are followed by countries. So that's why there was a complex regime of nuclear commerce. अब हमारे लिए क्या था जरूरी था? न्यूक्लियर और टेक्नोलॉजी आइसोलेशन को खत्म करना. दूसरा क्या जरूरी था? ऐसे खत्म करना कि हमको एनपीटी साइन नहीं करना पड़े. ऑल राइट. सो कैसे किया हमने? दोस्ती करके यूएस से. ऑल राइट. वी मेड अ स्ट्रॉन्ग फ्रेंड, राइट? यूएस. सो क्या हुआ इससे? फर्स्ट वी नेगोशिएटेड विद यूएस द सिविल न्यूक्लियर एग्रीमेंट. सिविल न्यूक्लियर एग्रीमेंट was then given approval by the US Congress. So now it has a legal status in US. India, exceptions were created for India. But in the same process, what we also did was, if we have not signed the NPT, then we needed approval of the NSG effectively. So with the help of the US, we negotiated a waiver from the NSG. Waiver, exception दिया जाए इंडिया को. What does it mean? कि हमने कहा हम नहीं साइन करेंगे एनपीटी, बट स्टिल हमको न्यूक्लियर ट्रेड करना है. सो विद द हेल्प ऑफ द यूएस, द एनएसजी गेव अस अ वेवर, वन टाइम वेवर. बट इट ऑल्सो मेंट दैट वी हैव टू एक्सेप्ट सर्टेन स्टैंडर्ड्स. So thereby we signed India specific safeguard agreement to satisfy the US, to satisfy the NSG, इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी. ऐसा नहीं कह सकते कि हमको सब मिल जाए. इंडिया स्पेसिफिक एग्रीमेंट साइन किया, यानी कि नॉट फुल स्कोप सेफगार्ड्स बट इंडिया स्पेसिफिक सेफगार्ड्स. एंड देन वी रेटिफाइड द प्रोटोकॉल विद द आईए. इफेक्टिवली इसका क्या मतलब है, मैंने कहा इफेक्टिवली इसका ये मतलब है, इंडिया सेपरेटेड इट्स न्यूक्लियर इंस्टॉलेशंस इन 2 कैटेगरीज, सिविलियन एंड मिलिट्री. इंडिया रिटेन्स द राइट for the future also to decide which installations would be civilian, which installations would be military. Military installations are under no international safeguard, no international obligation. So that means effectively we cannot use imported fuel for military purposes. All right, nuclear fuel जैसे यूरेनियम import कर रहे हैं तो military purposes के लिए use नहीं कर सकते. All right, but our civilian reactors, civilian facilities use imported uranium, imported fuel. All right, and our power plants can use imported reactors, just as Kudnakulam we have imported from Russia, Jaitapur from France. All right, अभी तक कोई यूएस वाला हमको बेच नहीं पाया है, पर ठीक है, ये मतलब है इसका, right? And UPSC has asked questions in this regard, which we will see whenever we get the time. Now, when we have reached here, differences still persisted on what? On ऑपरेशनलाइजेशन ऑफ द एग्रीमेंट. सो ये यूएस के साथ काम करने का एक्सपीरियंस है जो आपको पता होना चाहिए, दैट इट इज नॉट इजी, इट इज ऑलवेज स्टेप बाय स्टेप, इट टेक्स टाइम. ऑपरेशनलाइजेशन में हमारा डिफरेंस हो गया. क्या डिफरेंस हो गया? वन वॉज ए यूएस, वन जब भी आप यूएस के साथ कोऑपरेट कर रहे हैं, देयर आर इंट्रूसिव कंडीशंस सच एज फॉर एग्जांपल इंस्पेक्शंस. तो जैसे एक चीज याद करना, जब बालाकोट स्ट्राइक हुई, एयर स्ट्राइक हुई, उसके बाद ऑन द सेकेंड डे द पाकिस्तानीज यूज्ड F-16s. ऑल राइट, और फिर एक कैट फाइट हुई, फिर उसमें अभिनंदन साहब ने मुकाबला किया, फिर उनका प्लेन नीचे चला गया. फिर हमने कहा कि देखो F-16 का इस्तेमाल हुआ है, और फिर हमने यूएस से शिकायत की. ऑल राइट, यूएस से शिकायत क्यों की? क्योंकि यूएस आपको जब भी कोई चीज़ देता है तो कुछ टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस पे देता है, और वो उसमें से एक टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस ये है कि इंस्पेक्शन करेगा या स्टॉक टेकिंग करेगा. वो ये जानना चाहेगा कि हमने आपको दिया तो आपने किसी और को तो नहीं दे दिया. ऑल राइट, सो यूएस के साथ रिलेशन में ये सारी चीज़ें आती हैं. सो इंस्पेक्शंस, कंडीशंस इन टर्म्स ऑफ ऑपरेशनलाइजेशन ऑफ द एग्रीमेंट. एग्रीमेंट ऑपरेशनलाइज होने के बाद, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यूएस वुड लाइक टू विजिट facilities which are using imported fuel, all right, to ensure whether it has been transferred to someone else, all right, or whether it is only being used for civilian purposes. So इसकी conditions क्या होंगी, ये negotiate करना था हमको. दूसरा था liability related issues, all right. What liability related issues? India had passed a legislation called CLNDA 2010. ये क्या है? सिविलियन लाइबिलिटी फॉर न्यूक्लियर डैमेजेस एक्ट. सिविलियन लाइबिलिटी फॉर न्यूक्लियर डैमेजेस एक्ट, ये क्या है? इंडिया का कानून है. ऑल राइट, इफ यू सी, इफ यू डू योर पॉलिटी और पॉलिटिकल साइंस, देयर इज ऑलवेज वन एरिया वेयर यू विल फाइंड environmental legislation. So the way environmental legislation is developed in India, liability laws are a part of it. Liability laws are associated with any hazardous industry. अगर कोई hazardous industry है तो हम ये मान के चलते हैं कि कभी ना कभी कोई ना कोई एक्सीडेंट हो सकता है, और जब एक्सीडेंट होता है तो क्वेश्चन क्या आता है? लाइबिलिटी, जिम्मेदारी किसकी? कॉम्पनसेशन होता है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल द भोपाल इंडस्ट्रियल डिजास्टर है ना, तो तब हमारे पास वो कानून नहीं थे. फिर MC मेहता जैसे केसेस में सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने लाइबिलिटी की बात तय की कि जो इंडस्ट्री चला रहा है उसकी जिम्मेदारी है. तो उसके बाद लाइबिलिटी कानून आए इंडिया में. अब ये है एक लाइबिलिटी कानून. लाइबिलिटी कानून ये तय करते हैं कि जिम्मेदारी किसकी, ताकि बाद में ये नहीं हो कि पैसा नहीं है, कॉम्पनसेशन पे नहीं कर पाएंगे, कौन इलाज कराएगा, राइट. सो लाइबिलिटी कानून है ये. किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में? न्यूक्लियर इंडस्ट्री के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, क्योंकि न्यूक्लियर इंडस्ट्री बाय डेफिनेशन इज अ हैजार्डस industry because its byproducts are hazardous. All right, so when you are operating such an industry, international conventions also require you to have liability laws, क्योंकि अगर कोई न्यूक्लियर डिजास्टर होता है तो उसका इम्पैक्ट लिमिटेड नहीं होता. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यूक्रेन रशिया क्राइसिस इज गोइंग ऑन. वन न्यूक्लियर डिजास्टर दैट वी रिमेंबर इज चेरनोबिल. All right, the radiation from Chernobyl traveled far across Europe, right? So then always is the question कि कौन pay करेगा? Liability laws are about this, responsibility and compensation. So India passed CLNDA, Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages Act, right? So यहाँ पे ये हमारा कानून है, but US companies did not like it. Why? Because this law provides a recourse against suppliers as well. All right. So generally primary responsibility तो हमेशा operator की होगी, the one who is operating nuclear power plants. And who operates nuclear power plants in India? Which agency? NPCIL. All right, Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. So that's the only operator of nuclear power reactors, nuclear power plants in India. So एक बात हमेशा याद रखना, that all these countries that we are talking about, US, France, Russia, they are suppliers. They provide nuclear reactors. All right. So suppliers ने supply कर दिया, primary liability तो हमेशा operator की है, which is NPCIL. But this law also retains the possibility of pursuing a legal option against the supplier. All right. और ये बात किसको पसंद नहीं आई? US companies. So they didn't like it. All right. US companies didn't like it. Why? Because they would not like to be liable in the future. So that is where you see agreement signed, it has an effect. But in the context of India-US relations, operationalization was a difficulty. So thereby we continued talking. 2014 we constituted set up a working group, and 2015 we said that we have resolved our issues. All right, we formulated the conditions for implementation including inspection, and then we said on CLD and CLNDA we did not say much. We said that CLNDA is largely in consonance with international nuclear liability conventions. All right. Supplementary Convention on Nuclear Damages is a convention that India has signed. So we said it is in consonance with that, but we said that India has created a nuclear insurance pool. All right, nuclear insurance pool of 1500 crore rupees. So this nuclear insurance pool would be available to anyone who is held liable for nuclear damages. Nuclear insurance pool create किया हमने, right, in partnership between the government and the General Insurance Corporation. So that is something that we have done. So we said that we have resolved the operationalization issue, but these are the difficulties that you will find, either differences on laws or differences on conditions, right? और जो भी नया काम करने की कोशिश कर रहा होता है उसके साथ ये दिक्कत आती है, हमें आदत नहीं एक दूसरे के साथ काम करने की. So this was resolved in 2015, and then you will see what happened. President Obama visited India thrice. All right. President Obama was the chief guest at the Republic Day parade 2014, right? And then after that also President Trump visited India in 2020. बहुत खुश हुए. नमस्ते क्या? नमस्ते ट्रम्प. केम छो ट्रम्प इवेंट में पार्टिसिपेट करके. प्राइम मिनिस्टर went to US, वहाँ पे उन्होंने किया हाउडी मोदी, right? So that means that we have been working simultaneously on complex issues, that is generating experience in our systems to work with each other, and these are by nature very complex negotiations. Their operationalization is very difficult. For example, अभी तक कोई भी अमेरिकन कंपनी इस एग्रीमेंट का फायदा नहीं उठा पाई है. इंडिया को कोई रिएक्टर बेच नहीं पाए. वेस्टिंगहाउस वाज वन कंपनी. वेस्टिंगहाउस इज अ अमेरिकन न्यूक्लियर सप्लायर. It was interested in supplying nuclear reactors to India. मतलब इंडिया खरीदेगा ही obviously. Westinghouse became bankrupt. पहले तो इस पे मुद्दा चलता रहा कि ये इसको क्लैरिफाई करो. फिर Westinghouse bankrupt हो गया. All right. फिर उसके बाद अब इंडिया यूएस बात कर रहे हैं कि कैसे यूएस कंपनीज इस एग्रीमेंट का फायदा उठा सकती हैं. पर यूएस कंपनीज को फायदा हुआ हो या नहीं हुआ हो, हमको हुआ. हमको कैसे हुआ? हमने जब कहा कि टेक्नोलॉजी आइसोलेशन हमारा खत्म हुआ, तो इसके बाद हम किसके किसके मेंबर बन गए? हम बन गए मेंबर MTCR के, ऑलराइट, मिसाइल टेक्नोलॉजी कंट्रोल रिजीम। हम बन गए मेंबर वासेनार अरेंजमेंट के। These are groupings of countries exercising control over either military technology or dual use technology, वो वासेनार अरेंजमेंट, ऑलराइट। और फिर हम बन गए मेंबर किसके? ऑस्ट्रेलिया ग्रुप के, ऑलराइट। इनको और इसके साथ है NSG। NSG के हम मेंबर अभी तक नहीं है। MTCR के मेंबर हैं, वासेनार के मेंबर हैं और ऑस्ट्रेलिया ग्रुप के मेंबर हैं। इनको साथ में क्या कहते हैं? इनको कहते हैं MECR, मल्टीलैटरल एक्सपोर्ट कंट्रोल रेजीम्स, ऑलराइट, मल्टीलैटरल एक्सपोर्ट कंट्रोल regime. So Australia group involves countries which are influential in missile technology, rocket technology. Wassenaar arrangement is a group of countries which is influential in traditional weapons, all right, traditional weapons, small weapons. Australia group mainly is influential in terms of chemical and biological technology. It aims at preventing proliferation of chemical and biological weapons. And NSG, as we know, nuclear supplies group. It controls trade in nuclear technology. और न्यूक्लियर टेक्नोलॉजी और स्पेस टेक्नोलॉजी, मिसाइल टेक्नोलॉजी, ये इन सबको हम कहते हैं डुअल यूज टेक्नोलॉजी। फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर आप स्पेस में जाने के लिए रॉकेट बना सकते हैं, तो इसका मतलब क्या है कि आप मिसाइल बना सकते हैं। अगर आप पावर प्रोड्यूस कर सकते हैं न्यूक्लियर टेक्नोलॉजी से, तो इट इज ओनली अ फ्यू स्टेप्स अवे फ्रॉम डेवलपिंग न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स। मतलब पोटेंशियली कोई भी देश अगर सिविलियन न्यूक्लियर प्रोग्राम डेवलप कर सकता है, तो इसका मतलब ये है कि इट कैन ओनली इन अ मैटर ऑफ टाइम डेवलप न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स ऑल्सो। नथिंग प्रिवेंट्स इट फ्रॉम डूइंग दैट इफ इट इज इफ वांट्स टू डू दैट, राइट। ऑस्ट्रेलिया ग्रुप बायोलॉजिकल और केमिकल टेक्नोलॉजी को लिमिट करता है इन द सेंस ऑफ यूज एज वेपन, बट इफ यू आर developing a bacteria culture in the laboratory, that can also be a biological weapon, all right. क्या कह रहे हो? कोविड, हाँ, some people say COVID was a biological weapon, but that is debatable, उस पर जानना है हमको। और केमिकल टेक्नोलॉजी आपके पास है, तो in large scale and in specific delivery, through specific delivery mechanism, chemical technology can be used as a weapon. For example, जैसे कौन कौन से गैसेस? सारीन, ऑलराइट, मस्टर्ड गैस, फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वॉर में बहुत ज़्यादा इस्तेमाल हुआ था इनको। और केमिकल वेपन्स और बायोलॉजिकल वेपन्स का इस्तेमाल करने का एक नुकसान ये है कि आप कंट्रोल नहीं कर सकते उसको। फॉर एग्जांपल, US आफ्टर 9/11 हैड सीन अटैक्स इन विच पीपल रिसीव्ड मेल कंटेनिंग अ पाउडरी सब्सटेंस, ऑलराइट। सो उसके अंदर एंथ्रेक्स जो है वो था, ऑलराइट, एंथ्रेक्स। सो उसके अलावा जब आप केमिकल वेपन यूज़ करते हैं तो क्या होता है, हवा अगर बदल गई तो फिर आपको भी नुकसान हो जाएगा। तो जर्मन्स ने इस्तेमाल किया ब्रिटेन के खिलाफ, लेकिन उनका भी नुकसान हो गया। सो देयर आर रेजिम्स विच हैव डेवलप्ड फॉर कंट्रोलिंग टेक्नोलॉजी, स्पेसिफिकली लुकिंग एट द फैक्ट दैट टेक्नोलॉजी इज influential tool of military power, right? So India is now a member of MTCR, Wassenaar Arrangement and Australia Group, and this has only happened after civil nuclear agreement. So thereby now we look at areas of engagement between India and the US. Let's first take the example of economic engagements. So we see that a turnaround in the relationship largely came about because of interest in certain areas. One of them was economy, all right. So here we see that India-US trade has thrived. Change the numbers. Yesterday I had mentioned 117, right? Slightly wrong, 119 billion US dollars. And you see in this 76 billion US dollars. कल मैंने 117 लिखाया था, वहां पे आप करेक्ट कर ले, 119 है। 76 billion US dollars of exports and 43 billion US dollars of, right? So that means traditionally, remember, we have, if you look at the pattern of last 15 years, किसी भी साल में उठा के देख लें, इंडिया ऑलवेज हैज अ ट्रेड सरप्लस विद द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स. ऑल राइट, सो दैट इज हाउ ऑल्सो दिस इज an important trade for us, right? Then we see investments, FDI, from US to India has also increased. So we used the period of 2001 to 2020, around 52 billion US dollars of FDI from US to India. All right, foreign direct investment from US to India, 52 billion US dollars. Similarly here, India's investments in US is also growing, India's investments, right? So that would be around 17 billion US dollars. और इसमें हम वो सब भी काउंट करते हैं, इन्फोसिस जो अपने ऑफिसेज वहाँ ऑपरेट कर रही है फॉर एग्जांपल, ऑल राइट, या इंडियन कंपनी जो अपने ऑफिसेज वहाँ पे ऑपरेट करी. तो हम बहुत ही क्लियरली कहते हैं दैट इंडियन इन्वेस्टमेंट इज इन्वॉल्व्ड. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, इट इज नॉट कॉन्सेंट्रेटेड in any one state, it is in 31 states, all right, and it is an important employer. Indian investment is an important source of employment in the United States. ऐसा ऐसा क्यों कहते हैं? ऐसा इसलिए कहते हैं कि यूएस की डिबेट में these issues are headline issues. What issues? Employment, all right. So जब भी कोई यूएस का नेता भाषण दे रहा होगा वो ये कहेगा कि ये प्रोजेक्ट आने से मेरे इलाके में इतना एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेट हुआ है. दैट्स वाई प्राइवेट सेक्टर इज इंपॉर्टेंट. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, जब प्रेसिडेंट ओबामा केम टू इंडिया, वी साइंड फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम एन एग्रीमेंट टू बाई C-16 ग्लोबमास्टर. C-16 ग्लोबमास्टर वर्ल्ड्स लार्जेस्ट ट्रांसपोर्ट, हेवीएस्ट ट्रांसपोर्ट प्लेन. अभी हमारे पास काफ़ी हैं, वो C-17 है, तो ओके C-17 लिख लीजिए. C-17 ग्लोबमास्टर प्लेन्स manufactured by Boeing. So then US issues a statement going back कि ये president की visit से क्या फायदा हुआ. So it would always point out that Boeing getting this contract saved these many jobs in the United States. दूसरा, US के debate में आप हमेशा देखेंगे that there are people who will be making statements. For example, they will say that India runs sweatshops. There is high degree of outsourcing to India ऑफ अमेरिकन जॉब्स, है ना. ऐसा कह के क्रिटिसाइज करेंगे इंडिया को अमेरिका की पॉलिटिक्स में. तो इससे परेशान होने की जरूरत नहीं है, दिस इज पार्ट ऑफ देयर पॉलिटिक्स. इससे रिलेशन पे बहुत ज़्यादा असर नहीं पड़ता. इससे हमको यही समझ में आता है कि इकोनॉमी इज ऑलवेज एन इंपॉर्टेंट ड्राइवर ऑफ द रिलेशंस. इंडिया एंड यूएस के इकोनॉमिक इंटरेस्ट एक बड़े ड्राइवर हैं रिलेशंस के, तो इसलिए एक वोट से रिलेशन पे असर नहीं होता, राइट. सो देयर बाई आर आंसर इज सिंपली दैट आर इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इन यूएस इज इंक्रीजिंग. इट इज spread out across 31 states and it is source of one of the largest employments. Thereby we see by and large the picture is good. But what are the issues which have emerged between India and United States in this arena? So one, of course, there are two issues which are always significant. One is US raising the issue of market access, all right. Second, particularly this would be in the context of trade deficit. US को हमेशा ये शिकायत रहती है, क्या इंडिया इज अ प्रोटेक्शनिस्ट कंट्री, आवर कंपनीज आर फेसिंग इश्यूज इन मार्केट एक्सेस. और फॉर एग्जांपल अगर ट्रंप साहब जैसा प्रेसिडेंट हो तो वो हमेशा कहेगा कि ये तो ट्रेड डेफिसिट है, हमारा घाटा हो रहा है, हमको फायदा चाहिए, राइट. बट दीज आर टू इश्यूज विच आर देयर इन टर्म्स ऑफ नंबर ऑफ ट्रेड, एंड देन रिलेटेड इट विद इट इज इश्यूज लाइक intellectual property rights, and then migration issues when we look at services, all right. So these are always some of the issues which would be there in India US relations. We would liberalize at our own pace, we would try to control market access in certain areas because of our own interests, right. But the problem came from, let's say, the transactional approach. Rather than taking a long-term view, a very narrow view was taken by the Trump administration. Transactional approach adopted by the Trump administration, all right. That is something that was responsible for vitiating the engagements between India and United States in that period. So you understand, two economies trading with each other would always have issues. You also understand that the trade is beneficial for both sides. कोई किसी का ज़्यादा होगा, किसी का कम होगा, ऐसा होगा. So thereby these are issues of negotiation कि आप negotiate करते जाएं and at the end of it maybe you reach to an agreement like a free trade agreement. Maybe ऐसे होता है. पर अगर आप इसको रोज स्टेटमेंट्स में इस्तेमाल करने लगे, फॉर एग्जाम्पल ट्रम्प यूज टू ट्वीट दैट इंडिया इज टैरिफ किंग, मीनिंग देयर इज हाई टैरिफ इन इंडिया. आवर कंपनीज बेस्ड ऑन इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी फेस डिस्क्रिमिनेशन इन इंडिया और मार्केट एक्सेस इश्यूज इन इंडिया, राइट. तो ये विशिएट करता है एटमोस्फियर को. तो इस दौरान क्या स्टेप्स हुए? फॉर एग्जाम्पल यूएस increased tariffs in areas like steel, aluminum, all right. So they increased tariffs, not India specific but across many countries. So this was part of larger tariff escalation strategy vis-a-vis China. Right? Trump accused China of being a currency manipulator. Trump pointed out that look, China has more than 200 billion US dollars, 250 billion US dollars of trade surplus with US. उसका जवाब क्या है? So he raised tariffs in areas like steel and aluminum. So there also, even though it is small part, it is part of our exports to US. We did not like it. We asked US to reconsider it. And then India recognized around 28 categories of goods to put higher tariff on. India said, if you don't change your decision, we will also put counter tariffs. So around 28 categories of goods, mainly agricultural goods. जैसे इंडिया में हम अमेरिका का क्या खाते हैं? कैलिफोर्निया आलमंड्स, ऑल राइट. अब हमारी शेल्फ में अमेरिका के एप्पल भी पड़े रहते हैं, वॉशिंगटन एप्पल. सो दीज काइंड्स ऑफ कैटेगरीज वी आइडेंटिफाइड टू पुट हायर टैरिफ ऑन. अराउंड 28 गुड्स वी आइडेंटिफाइड टू पुट हायर टैरिफ्स ऑन, बट वी सस्पेंडेड देम कि हम इसको बाद में करेंगे, पहले बातचीत कर लेते हैं, राइट. सो दिस इज व्हाट वाज गोइंग ऑन इन दैट पीरियड. एंड देन व्हाट हैपेंड, द जीएसपी बेनिफिट्स वर withdrawn. So ट्रंप ने क्या किया, ट्रंप एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ने क्या किया? इट विड्रू जीएसपी बेनिफिट्स फ्रॉम इंडिया. वो उनका तरीका था इंडिया पे प्रेशर पुट करने का. क्यों? बिकॉज ट्रंप साहब इज नोन फॉर हिज अपीयरेंस इन शोज लाइक द अप्रेंटिस इन यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स, राइट. सो चुनाव भी इसलिए लड़ा ट्रंप साहब ने कि कुछ नहीं होगा तो वो कहते हैं ना कि क्या कहते हैं उसको, कि अगर आप बदनाम भी होते हैं तो नाम तो होता है. तो चुनाव लड़े, हारेंगे तो क्या हो गया, हारना तो है ही, सीरियसली नहीं लिया उन्होंने, नाम तो होगा, ट्रंप को सब जानेंगे, बट वो जीत गए. ऑल राइट. सो दैट वाज ट्रेवेस्टी. सो ही बेसिकली थिंक्स that his strategy is put difficult conditions, bring the other side to negotiating table, negotiate a new deal which is beneficial for US. अब इतना ही आसान होता तो सभी कर लेते, but that was his stated policy. उनके लिए चीज़ें बहुत सिंपल थी. So GSP benefits were withdrawn, meaning जो हम कहते हैं generalized system of preference, it is part of global trade practices. All right. Since the 1970s, and it has been developed by the efforts of UN groupings called UN groupings like UNCTAD. UNCTAD is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. UN Conference on Trade and Development. लिख लो, फिर बाद में आके पूछते हो, अभी लिख लो. United Nations Conference on Trade and Development जैसी बॉडीज ने रिकमेंड किया है. क्या रिकमेंड किया है? That in order to facilitate trade, developing and least developed countries should be provided preferential market access. GSP का ये मतलब होता है, meaning developed countries have put in place policies which provide preferential market access to developing and least developed countries. It is part of global trade practices. All right. हम लगातार बात करते आ रहे हैं कि ट्रेड को कैसे लिबरलाइज किया जाए. वन रिजल्ट वाज WTO, राइट. WTO, इफ यू रिमेंबर, केम आउट ऑफ सीरीज ऑफ राउंड्स ऑफ निगोशिएशंस, राइट. सो इसका मतलब कुछ इश्यूज जो है कांस्टेंट हैं. क्या इश्यूज कांस्टेंट हैं? कि दुनिया में एक लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड कैसे क्रिएट करें, इंसेंटिवाइज कैसे करें ट्रेड को. उसका एक तरीका जो था अंकटाड जैसे देशों, अंकटाड जैसे एजेंसी से निकाला. अंकटाड क्या है? यूनाइटेड नेशंस कन्वेंशन ऑन कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑन ट्रेड एंड डेवलपमेंट, ऑलराइट, विच हेल्प्स डेवलपिंग एंड लीस्ट डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज टू इनहांस देयर ट्रेड. कि कुछ प्रिफरेंशियल एक्सेस दिया जाए टू प्रमोट ट्रेड इन सर्टेन कैटेगरीज. सो GSP benefits were available to least developed and developing countries. In the case of US, India was the largest beneficiary of the GSP benefits. All right, हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है? Because around $5 billion of our exports to US market were covered by the GSP system, which means trade on the basis of 0% tariff, right? So around $5 billion of products, right? For example, automobile spare parts, etc. We used to export to US under the GSP preference system, $5 billion. So not a very large number, but symbolically it meant that US was changing its approach. So this is also something that we didn't like. US withdrawing the GSP preference given to India. In this period, US also, as part of its trade review, reclassified India out of the developing country list, right? So US ने अपने खुद के कंसिडरेशन में इंडिया को कहा कि अब आप डेवलपिंग कंट्री नहीं हो, ऑल राइट, यू आर नॉट अ डेवलपिंग कंट्री. उनका क्राइटेरिया था कि फॉर एग्जाम्पल इफ अ कंट्री इज पार्ट ऑफ G20, ऑल राइट, इफ अ कंट्री इज पार्ट ऑफ G20 you cannot be considered to be a developing country. So they made their own list of developing, least developed, etc. country. उसमें क्या किया उन्होंने? They reclassified India out of the developing country list, which means that these kinds of steps have an effect on consideration of tariffs, right? So these were all detrimental to India's interests, and then US flagged that in this time India adopts practices like cap on the price of medical devices, right? For example, stents. सुना है आपने stents, medical stents, which are used in the context of, let's say, if anyone has CAD, right? Coronary artery disease, जब हार्ट की वॉल्स ब्लॉक हो जाते हैं तो स्टेंट लगाते हैं, सुना होगा आपने. सो दीज आर मेडिकल डिवाइसेस, राइट? एंड सम US कंपनीज आर लीडिंग companies in terms of manufacturing of these kinds of devices. So India has capped the price of devices like stents or knee and hip implants, है ना, घुटने बदलने की सर्जरी होती है या हिप बदलने की सर्जरी होती है. So these are medical devices, and US companies like Johnson and Johnson are leading companies in terms of these devices. So India, as policy, caps the prices of these devices. US said that this is discriminatory, we don't like it, all right? And then US also accuses India in terms of restriction on market access, to IP intensive, intellectual property intensive products. So US says by these kinds of policies, India is creating hurdles in market access for the products based on intellectual property. So it is creating a hurdle in the path of market access for the creators of intellectual property in US. All right? And thereby, इसी से related एक चीज़ है कि there is one agency called USTR, United States Trade Representative Office. United States Trade Representative Office reviews all the commercial relations that US has, and it comes up with many reports. One of the reports is called Special 301 report, and in this report there is a category called priority watch list. Priority watch list. So without any doubt, in any year you can pick this option. India is in the priority watch list of US TR 301 special 301 report, which means what? So countries in the priority watch list are defined as those trading partners of United States with deficiency in their intellectual property right regime. All right, deficiency in intellectual property right protection. So जिनको भी यूएस ऐसा समझता है कि इन देशों के में ये कमी है, उनको कहाँ रखता है? Priority watch list, which means what? That their laws, regulations would be closely watched. All right, their performance would be closely watched, and this would always be raised by US as an issue in any negotiation with India. इससे ज़्यादा नहीं. All right, इससे ज़्यादा नहीं. China is also on priority watch list. Russia is also priority watch list. In some years, Canada also has been in priority watch list. So ये US की लिस्ट है जिसमें वो हमको एक स्पेशल कैटेगरी में रखता है कि हमको देखना है. मतलब कुछ इश्यूज ऐसे हैं जैसे कि पायरेसी. फॉर एग्जांपल यहाँ से थोड़ी दूर चले जाओ, गफार मार्केट है. यू विल फाइंड पायरेटेड प्रोडक्ट्स. आपको चेंज कराना है तो कंपनी का भी मिल जाएगा और नकली नहीं, मतलब रिप्लेसमेंट मिल जाएगा, फर्स्ट कॉपी मिल जाएगा. और ये नेहरू प्लेस, दीज प्लेसेस आर नेम्ड इन रिपोर्ट्स. नेहरू प्लेस हम चले जाएंगे तो नेहरू प्लेस में आपको जो दुनिया का सॉफ्टवेयर चाहिए वो मिल जाएगा. ऑल राइट, यू विल फाइंड ऑल दी सॉफ्टवेयर देयर pirated software, right? Most people use not the original version of Microsoft but pirated version of Microsoft. एक तो Microsoft ने उसको अलाउ किया, आंख बंद की, लेकिन जनरली ऐसा होता है, प्रेफरेंस क्या होता है, ये खरीदेंगे नहीं, कहीं ना कहीं से मिल जाएगा, डाउनलोड कर लेंगे कि कोई दोस्त दे देगा, राइट? सो दीज आर प्रैक्टिसेस विच आर कंसिडर्ड टू बी डेट्रीमेंटल टू दी इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी क्रिएटर्स. कि भाई उन्होंने क्रिएट किया तो उनको कोई भी फिल्म की सीडी आपको मिल जाएगी, राइट? वॉच एनी अमेरिकन मूवी, समटाइम्स इट वुड कम विथ अ वार्निंग कि भाई अगर आप नकली मूवी देख रहे हैं, नकली कॉपी देख रहे हैं तो बी वॉन्ड, FBI आ सकता है. ऑल राइट, ऐसा हो सकता है. तो ये सब पायरेसी जैसी चीजें. तो वी आर रेडी टू विलिंग टू वर्क ऑन एरियाज लाइक पायरेसी. ऑल राइट, पायरेसी. But where we are not ready to work, or according to US choices, is areas like pharmaceuticals or areas like medical devices. तो यहाँ पे we will not go beyond our requirement. Piracy, of course, we are willing to cooperate with the US, right? So ये basically subject matter है USTR की report का. And then similarly, we have our WTO disputes. What kind of WTO disputes? So one kind of dispute has been on the area of solar panel. Agriculture जो चलो है ही, solar panel. Solar panel में क्या? US first took India in 2013 on the issue of domestic procurement clause. All right? Domestic procurement clause क्या होता है? For example, you have a scheme. So at that point in time, we had a Jawaharlal Nehru solar mission. In that, our aim is, अभी भी हमारे पास solar program है अपना. Our aim is simple, to expand the generation of solar power, to increase the share of solar in our energy basket. And when we do this, we know that part of it would be fulfilled by imports, but at the same time, we would also like to incentivize domestic manufacturing. So we put conditions such as certain preference to domestic procurement. Domestic manufacturers would be preferred in terms of procurement. All right. So US said that this goes against the WTO principles. It is trade distorting. All right. It is trade distorting, and WTO upheld US position on this matter. So UPSC had, अगर UPSC WTO भी क्वेश्चन पूछता है ना, बहुत आसान पूछता है. कैसे क्वेश्चन? The term blue, amber and green box appear in news in the context of affairs of किसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ये सुना है आपने? यूपीएससी ऐसे क्वेश्चन पूछता है, अगर आप क्वेश्चन देखो तो। फिर यूपीएससी ने पूछा कि डोमेस्टिक प्रोक्योरमेंट क्लॉज हैज बीन इन न्यूज इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ, सो डोमेस्टिक प्रोक्योरमेंट क्लॉज in the context of India US WTO dispute on the solar program, all right. So similarly इसके बाद 2016 में India took US to WTO, all right, saying that the renewable energy program of many of the US states have used domestic procurement clause which goes against the conditions of WTO. तो यूएस या इंडिया ये केस बनाएंगे कि हमारे सप्लायर्स को नुकसान हुआ क्योंकि यहाँ पे डोमेस्टिक सप्लायर्स को प्रेफर किया गया। तो यहाँ पे यूएस जीत गया, यहाँ पे हम जीत गए, ऑल राइट। सो WTO अपहेल्ड आवर पोजीशन। हमने कहा कि आपके रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी प्रोग्राम में भी स्टेट्स की पॉलिसी डोमेस्टिक प्रोक्योरमेंट क्लॉज का वायलेशन करती हैं बिकॉज दे प्रेफर डोमेस्टिक मैन्युफैक्चरर, राइट। सो रिमेंबर WTO में जाने का मतलब ये नहीं है कि दुश्मनी हो गई। गोइंग टू WTO मीन्स अ विलिंगनेस टू रिजॉल्व योर इश्यूज ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ रूल्स। एंड व्हाट इज इट दैट इंडिया स्टैंड्स फॉर? अ रूल्स बेस्ड ऑर्डर एनीवेयर, इंक्लूडिंग अ रूल्स बेस्ड ट्रेडिंग ऑर्डर, ऑल राइट। कभी वो जीतेंगे, कभी हम जीतेंगे, राइट, बट एटलीस्ट वी आर नॉट डूइंग व्हाट यूएस एंड चाइना डिड। व्हाट इज इट दैट यूएस एंड चाइना डिड? यूएस एंड चाइना एस्केलेटेड टैरिफ्स अगेंस्ट ईच अदर, बढ़ाते गए टैरिफ आपस में विदाउट worrying about the WTO. So these are some of the issues that you will find between India and US, and add to it, since a large category of Indian workers migrate to US for work, immigration issues, right, as they are called, immigration issues. So the concern is always ease of immigration for Indians, ease of what we call movement of professionals, because movement of professionals or in other words movement of natural persons, if you know, is one mode of services trade acknowledged in GATS, General Agreement on Trade in Services. उसके अंदर एक मोड क्या है? movement of natural persons, all right. So movement of professionals is something that we are always concerned with. Why? Because large number of Indians go to US and we benefit from visa categories like H1B or L1 visa. H1B or L1 visa are non-immigrant visa categories. Non-immigrant visa categories, which means they by definition are for shorter term, all right. So that means they are applicable for particular purposes, right. For example, H1B visa allows US companies to recruit global talent, all right, recruit workers, professionals from abroad, right. So this is a visa which is work related visa applicable for highly skilled professionals, right. And 60 to 70% of H1B visa is taken by Indians, all right. So it is not an India specific visa, it's a global visa program, but 60 to 70% traditionally of H1B visa category goes to Indians, all right. Meaning around, let's say they used to issue 80,000 H1B visa. एक साल में US कितना issue करेगा? Around 80,000. Or if it wants, it may increase it. So most of the visas were going to the Indians, all right. L1 visa also is for those who work in technical areas, all right. In, for example, in areas like research and development, right? Researchers. So they will acquire H1, they will acquire L1 visa. These are two non-immigrant visas Indians benefited from. So in the Trump administration, there was a focus on immigration reforms, right? That's why build the wall. Trump साहब क्या कहते थे? We will build a wall. कहाँ? US Mexico border. क्यों? That was his tool of immigration reforms, कि हम illegal immigration रोकेंगे. दूसरा आप ये कैसे कर सकते हैं? आप इस तरह की modalities को ट्वीक कर सकते हैं इमिग्रेशन रिफॉर्म के लिए. सो यूएस एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन अंडर ट्रम्प सेड दैट वी विल पुट अ कैप ऑन द H1B visa which is issued annually, all right, putting a cap on H1B visa. So when this happens, we can't say the US is doing something wrong. इट इज पार्ट ऑफ यूएस पॉलिसी. यूएस को अधिकार है ये तय करने का कि H1B वीजा कितना देगा वो, बट we understand that it affects our interests of Indians. It is not illegal, wrong, but this is an example of effects of policies and politics of, syllabus में एक term है, effects of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India है. So this is an example of that. So putting a cap or increasing the fee, visa fee, or changes in visa renewal rule, for example, whether you can renew the visa without coming back to India, or you would have to come back to India to renew the visa, right? Visa renewal आप वहाँ रह के कर सकते हैं या इंडिया आना पड़ेगा आपको. So generally अब लोगों को इंडिया आना पड़ता है वापस. So that is basically, these are some of the difficulties that Indians may face in the US. And remember, these are part of negotiations. But India also complains, for example, when Trump administration suspended all H1B immigration, कब? During COVID. All right, during COVID. So during COVID, generally also immigration was low key, and US had suspended immigration under H1B, so we complained to the WTO. But this has been restored by the Biden administration. So Biden administration has restored some of the previous practices which were removed by the Trump administration, right? So these are issues that we will see generally taking place between India and United States. Some of them are issues of major differences, some of them issues are issues of management of relations. So thereby we see, one, India and US constituted, क्या होता है इस केस में, constituted a trade dialogue. All right, we constituted a trade dialogue to address these issues. All right, so you would see our Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. So at the level of Commerce Ministers, a trade dialogue was constituted. In the Trump administration, the declared purpose was reaching to a trade deal. So when Mr. Trump came to India, the idea was that India and US are working on a trade deal which would be announced soon. And Trump साहब हमेशा ये कहते थे कि something very big is going to happen. But this trade deal never came about. हुआ नहीं अभी तक. All right. It is very clear, it has been made clear that US right now is not interested in a deal like free trade agreement. अभी US का interest नहीं है. All right. अभी US का interest नहीं है. और generally हमको भी कोई चिंता नहीं, because without free trade agreement we have a large trade and trade surplus with the US. But certainly trade dialogue, strategic trade dialogue is happening between India and US. Secondly, we say that we are willing to address these issues. For example, India is willing to undertake tariff reforms, but at its own pace. We will be doing it as and when our policy space is conducive for this. So we don't disagree with the US that tariffs need to be addressed, but it's just that we would not be doing it on gunpoint. जबरदस्ती नहीं करेंगे हम, है ना? That is what we are saying. That, so that is what we will be standing for. Then we say that relations must be seen through the strategic prism rather than transactionally. क्या नहीं होना चाहिए? अप्रोच ट्रांजैक्शनल नहीं होना चाहिए, अप्रोच स्ट्रैटेजिक होना चाहिए. इसका मतलब क्या है? लॉन्ग टर्म अप्रोच. वी शुड लुक एट ट्रेड और इकोनॉमिक इश्यूज एज पार्ट ऑफ आवर लार्जर स्ट्रैटेजिक पार्टनरशिप. So we should not be making an issue out of small things. All right, certainly not making statements which vitiate the atmosphere, right? So we should look at it strategically, not transactionally. And then we also point out, for example, क्या पॉइंट आउट किया हमने, दैट इफ यू लुक एट इकोनॉमिक इक्वेशंस, it's not only a simple issue of market access or simple issue of trade deficit. So if you see year on year, US exports to Indian market is also increasing. ऐसा नहीं है कि US export increase नहीं कर रहा. Indian exports are increasing at a higher pace. So there is a positive trend in the trade relations. That should be acknowledged, which means what? That trade by and large is expanding. US exports to India's market is also expanding. All right? And thereby, what we say is that it is important to remember that other aspects of trade, for example, Indian investments in the US, in the USA are key employment generators. All right, our companies are employing more and more people of US. All right, so US generally, there are many cases, case against TCS, case against Infosys, where US employees have complained that Indian companies prefer Indians more. अपने लोगों को ले आके नौकरी देते हैं. But still we are saying that our companies are employing Americans. So हम employment generator हैं भाई आपके लिए, right? And then we are saying that if you look at economic relations, apart from trade, you see that there has been an increase in the defense trade, right? So why should it be looked at strategically, not transactionally? Because the trade or economic engagements are much wider. Trade has grown, it means that US exports have also grown. It has not been the case that US exports have not grown. Similarly, Indian investments in US is growing, which generates jobs for Americans. Similarly, other ways of economic transactions are also flourishing because there has been an increase in defense trade. Or you can see that the number of Indian students, all right, in US has increased to 200,000. 200,000 Indian students enrolled in US universities bring $8 billion to American economy. All right, 200,000 Indian students. That is what also we can say, that count this cost as well, right? 200,000 Indian students enrolled in US universities, adding $8 billion to US economy. And then trade in petroleum. For example, US today is our largest LNG supplier. We are buying the highest amount of LNG from US. So trade in petroleum, which was non-existent before 2018. Before 2017-18, trade in petroleum was non-existent. So from being non-existent, now trade in petroleum also has increased. So that's why economic engagements have to be seen strategically rather than transactionally. Rather than focusing on issues of differences or only on few issues, we should look at these things also. What is it that we are saying? That first of all, the issues should be resolved through dialogue. All right, so India and US constituted a trade dialogue to address the issues in the Trump era, all right, which aimed at reaching to a trade deal which has not come by. So we don't see a possibility of free trade agreement right now, but dialogue would continue. Tariff reforms is something that is in India's interest because we want to become attractive economy in terms of manufacturing, but it will happen on our own pace, our own interests. Relations, we say, must be seen, including economic relations, must be seen through the strategic prism rather than transactionally. It is not dependent on relations in one era or view of one president, but it is larger in terms of time. But also if we add other areas of economic engagements, we can give examples of how India is beneficial for US. Indian investments increasing jobs in US, increase in defense trade. India is buying from US defense equipments. Indian students are moving to US in large numbers, so they are adding to US economy. And then trade in petroleum or categories like LNG, which was non-existent before 2017-18, has now dramatically increased. So that's basically the economic engagements between India and United States. All right. And what is the next area? We will just start. We would not be able to finish, but we'll start. What is the next area? Next major driver of relations. The next major driver of relations is defense and security. So yesterday we had already talked about the headline figures. For example, defense and security relations are a major driver of current equations between India and US. So that is something that we can say, that defense and security cooperation is a major driver of India-US relations. That means what? That relationship has both diversified as well as is deepening. All right, there is a diversified defense cooperation as well as there is an intent to deepen the defense cooperation or provide it a strategic character. Right, so thereby we had seen, if you remember yesterday, examples of defense agreements which are continuing. We saw the example of defense procurement which has reached 20 billion US dollars. We have seen example of increasing number of exercises. And apart from that, of course, there are increasing number of dialogues. So we see that defense is driven by A1, the complementarity that exists. Complementarity in what sense? USA, world's largest defense exporter. अब ये वर्ल्ड लार्जेस्ट डिफेंस एक्सपोर्टर है तो इसको तो हमेशा ये होगा ना यार, ये इंडिया क्यों नहीं बाई कर रहा हमसे. वाई? बिकॉज इंडिया इज वर्ल्ड्स लार्जेस्ट डिफेंस importer, all right, or at least one of the largest if you account for year to year differences. Some year maybe Saudi Arabia buys more, but we are, since we are moving in the direction of defense modernization, defense indigenization, it means that Indian market has an opportunity of around 120 billion US dollars in the area of defense. ये बड़ा मार्केट है और अमेरिका वालों को हमेशा दिखता है, जो भी स्मार्ट लोग हैं उनको दिखता है. All right, so you will notice something. Private companies now in India are entering into defense manufacturing, right? The Ambanis have a defense wing now. Tatas have a defense wing now. Adani Sahab also has a defense wing now. क्यों? Because these people know that India's defense market is going to be a large one. तो अगले 10 साल में the opportunity sometimes नंबर पुट करते हैं मैकिन्से जैसे कंसल्टेंसी वाले, वो क्या कहते हैं, 120 बिलियन US डॉलर्स ऑफ मार्केट अपॉर्चुनिटी इन इंडिया, बिकॉज हमारी जरूरत है, हम ऐसा करने जा रहे हैं. सो दैट इज बेसिकली वन कॉम्प्लीमेंटारिटी विच इज देयर. सेकेंड, इट इज बेस्ड ऑन what we see, the increasing geostrategic convergence. All right, there is a comfort which is developing in terms of common issues, right? So that is these are the two drivers of the defense ties that we have: complementarity, buyer seller, and geostrategic convergence, meaning long term interest that we may have. Thereby we see that first of all there is a step-by-step effort to develop defense relations. 2005 we signed what is called the Defense Cooperation Framework Agreement, or Framework Agreement for Defense Cooperation, meaning we signed a very broad agreement defining the contours of defense cooperation, declaring the intent of deeper, closer defense cooperation. It has been renewed in 2015. So it is an agreement that is renewed. Now we see that in this period, then we have initiatives like DTTI. All right. So DTTI started in 2012, and its idea is to enhance cooperation in co-design and co-production. All right, co-design and co-production. So DTTI and its various working groups do what? They facilitated dialogue in identifying areas where Indians and Americans can co-design and co-produce. All right, जैसे रशिया के साथ हम कहते हैं joint manufacturing, US वालों के साथ हम कहते हैं co-design and co-produce. All right, So that is what DTTI aims to do. It has created various working groups which are identifying technologies, right? Technologies like what? Right now, in recent times, we have identified areas like unmanned aerial vehicle. These are the technologies that we can develop together, right? There are various technologies, but one of the areas in which India would be interested in, ये हमको मिल जाए अगर, एयरक्राफ्ट करियर टेक्नोलॉजी, और टेक्नोलॉजी इज रिलेवेंट टू aircraft carrier. Why? Because US runs the largest aircraft carrier fleet in the world. So DTTI क्या करता है? It aims at imparting strategic value to, strategic character to India-US defense relations. By doing what? By promoting the idea of co-production, co-design and co-production. By doing what? By identifying areas in which such a cooperation can take place. So for example, identification of unmanned aerial vehicle recently, or broadly we see benefits reaching out to cooperation ultimately in technologies related with aircraft carrier. All right, so that is one thing. Now the other thing is this, that if India and US are engaging with each other, so we have the, for example, C-16 Globemaster, we have started buying from US, or Apache or Chinook. So the value of these procurement is around 20 billion US dollars. So within a decade, non-existent defense trade has crossed the 20 billion US dollar mark, right? Now the DTTI means that in the future it is not only going to be limited to buyer-seller relation, but some degree of joint manufacturing, co-production, co-design would take place. But what would give thrust to this? Meaning, how can we sustain this? So you see, if you are working with the US, you need to also work on agreements to provide a certain special status, right? So if you see, US generally has its alliances, or in what real sense can be called its allies. So what is it? So you have, first of all, the 5 eye system of which the US is part. 5 eyes, 5 aankhein. Who are these? These are a group of Anglophone countries, right? With greater, closer cultural cooperation and tradition of defense cooperation. कौन है इसमें? US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So this is basically mainly intelligence sharing cooperation. So these kinds of partners US has, and then US has its allies like NATO allies, all right, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was created in 1949, located in Brussels. So another category of partners are those partners with whom US has any collective security or collective defense arrangement. So US cooperation with them is also well defined, right? And then US has another category of allies which are called non-NATO allies. Non-NATO allies कौन है? For example, let's start with our neighborhood. Pakistan is defined as US non-NATO ally. All right. So that's why you always understand that this is another level of game that you have to play. जैसे जब मोबाइल में नए नए गेम आए थे तो हम खेलते थे, फिर डिफिकल्टी लेवल बढ़ता जाता था, बढ़ता जाता था, बढ़ता जाता था, बढ़ता जाता था. तो यूएस के साथ रिलेशन जो है वो हाई डिफिकल्टी लेवल का गेम है. दैट्स वाई वी डोंट कॉमेंट ऑन कि इसने ये कह दिया तो उसने वो कह दिया. सारी चीज़ों के लिए स्कोप है, बट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ यूएस वर्क्स. सो दीज आर एस्टैब्लिश स्टेटस. एस्टैब्लिश स्टेटस का मतलब क्या है? यूएस सिस्टम को काम करने की आदत है इनके साथ, लीगल इंस्टीट्यूशनल मैकेनिज्म्स हैं इनके साथ काम करने के लिए. सो दैट्स वाई फंक्शनिंग इज स्मूथ. सो नाउ व्हाट डू यू डू विद अ कंट्री लाइक इंडिया? India is not a traditional partner of US, neither would it be willing to be an ally or part of any of the alliances. So thereby in 2016, US under President Trump initially decided to designate India as a major defense partner. ये किस लिए हुआ? क्योंकि US के अंदर आप हमेशा देखोगे डिबेट में एक बात आती है, taxpayers money. All right, argument would be, why are we spending taxpayers' money to support Afghanistan or taxpayers' money to do this, that. So that means that purse is controlled by the Congress. Decisions can be taken by the president. President is called the imperial president because US president can declare war, can take decisions in the matters of national security, can take decisions in the matter of war. पर war चलाने के लिए पैसा चाहिए ना. पैसा is controlled by the US Congress. All right, the US Congress. And when you are looking at these kinds of issues, so what you see is you have government to government engagement with the president's administration, but the long-term status would always be determined by the legal status. So US के अंदर के डिफेंस बजट को हम कहते हैं NDAA. All right, National Defense Authorization Act. So consecutive National Defense Authorization Acts of US since 2016 have first of all required creating a designation for India so that continuity can be maintained, and thereby what we see is the process right now is declaring India as a major defense partner, which includes a lot of things, but it basically includes signing some foundational agreements. What are these foundational agreements? This is where we will stop and we will carry on in the next class. One is called LEMOA 2016. Another is called COMCASA, Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. LEMOA is Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement. COMCASA is Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement 2018. And another agreement which was signed was the last one, BECA, Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement 2021. All right, BECA, Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. Apart from that, you will see sometimes some sources would say these kinds of agreements. GSOMIA, which is General Security of Military Agreement 2002. Some sources would say that this is also a part of foundational agreement, but as far as I have inquired with those who know, 3 are called foundational agreement. General Security of Military Information Agreement is simple agreement which you would have to sign with any country. अगर आप military cooperation कर रहे हैं तो there is an expectation that some of it would be safeguarded, classified, and then associated with some of them are other agreement. For example, Industrial Security Annex 2020 is an annex to GSOMIA, which provides for private sector cooperation also. And then some are part of US process, not agreement with India, but US policy process. So one of them is called STA status to India, STA 1 status to India, which was given in 2018. But these are foundational agreements that India and US have negotiated and signed, right? This is a general agreement that India and US had signed in 2002. ISA is an attachment to GSOMIA, which allows for cooperation between private sectors also in defense. And STA, Strategic Trade Authorization List 1, is a status that US grants to some of its defense trade partners, right? So this is what we will expand in the next class. And with these two major areas, the discussion of these two major areas, we will then finally wrap up relations with US, and then we will talk about Africa and West Asia. Again, I will repeat, Latin America becomes only important when something of it is in news. That's why आपको मटेरियल ढूंढने कहीं नहीं जाना पड़े, इसलिए प्रिंटेड मटेरियल में वो दिया हुआ है. All right, but if we see questions have not been asked from it, right? So we consider that to be important for people from optional. GS में अभी तक लैटिन अमेरिका के क्वेश्चन आते नहीं हैं. So that's why रीडिंग मटेरियल में, और कवर कब होता है, जब भी वो किसी तरह से न्यूज में आए, तो करंट अफेयर्स से होता है, right? But reading material is there. So that's why Africa and West Asia, because from these regions questions come. For example, I2U2, a question from West Asia, all right? And 2021 questions were there from Africa, right? So that is what we will be doing. Thank you very much. That would be all.